All right. So for your final project, if you want to go to our session 5 this week's session, and if you take a look under the resources for session 5, you'll see this final project requirement and final project proposal. So if you click and take a look at the final project requirement, it's not, again, this is what I really sort of expecting at the very end. It will be due on our last day of class. We will have a final critique. It'll be the only time you do your own work, really. Well, that's not true. One of the 2 times that you do your own work in this class. But at any rate, so this is what I'm looking for in your final project. It's to be an integration of your technical skills in Photoshop with your own creativity. So again, what I'm hoping that you will do is that you will use some of the skills that you have mastered in this class to work on your final project. But this part's really critical for me. So I know we've talked about this before, but I can't stress this enough. The last thing in the world I want you to do is simply come up with some assignment for yourself that you do to just satisfy the requirement for this class, and then that's it. That's meaningless. It is a waste of your time. It is a waste of work. Most importantly, it does nothing to help build your portfolio, and that portfolio is everything to you. So what I need you to do is think about how you can use some of the skills that you have learned in this class to really apply to your personal work, the work that you hope to do. So if you're a fine artist, great. If you're a food shooter, great. If you're a people shooter, great. If you're a fashion shooter, great. I don't care what that is. If you're a landscape photographer, it does not matter. There have got to be some skills that you have learned in this class, even if it's just the most simple basic dodging and burning, but done using smart objects, a smart way of doing it. That's what I want. I want you to use this as an opportunity to develop work for your portfolio. Does that sort of make sense, everyone? Are we good on that part? Please do not come in here and say, well, yeah, Versa, I just took a bunch of my friends' pictures. They all want to be beauty photographers. I retouched it for them. I could care less about this shit. I really want to shoot portraits. That would just be a nightmare to me, because then you've done all of this work, spent all of that time, and it doesn't help you beyond other than getting a grade in this class, which seems like a real waste to me. So are we good on that part? So I want you to think about it in that context. So then the next thing that comes down is that, well, what do I expect you to really do? We cover a cornucopia of stuff in this class. We cover so many things in this class. I do not expect you to demonstrate every single skill that you developed in this class in your final project. The more things that you can use from this class in your final project, I think the better. But that's, again, if it doesn't apply to your work, it doesn't apply to your work. Does that sort of make sense, everyone? Are there questions about this? The other thing is that for this class, your final project does not need to be a cohesive body of work. If you show up with one portrait, one landscape, one food shot, one whatever, I don't care. It doesn't need to be a final project in the sense like you would do for photo sound. Does that sort of make sense as well? Are we good on this part? So again, I'm more concerned about this really helping to develop work that you can use once you leave here to actually get a job. That's what it really is critical for me, more than almost anything in this. Because that's what I see this class is doing, is helping you continue to develop that work. But again, for your portfolio. So then people ask me, well, how many images do you need? And I say this, everyone, there's no fixed number per se. Everybody in this room knows what a final is. Everybody in here knows what a body of work that would be considered a final should be, right? So I can say this to you, for me, in most cases, if you are, say, if you're a portrait, or let's say not a portrait, what I'm going to do is a beauty photographer. If you are going to do some pretty serious heavy retouching on beauty and you do 5 of those, that seems like a final to me. That's a lot of work. Do you guys all know the mural that's on? It's actually not a mural; it's a photograph, but it's on one of the it's on the building right over here. It's the moose blowing the big bubblegum bubble, right? That the guy who actually shot that was in this class years ago. And if I had any brain at all left, I could come up with his name. Yes, Jacob. What's Jacob's last name? Bingo. Him. It wasn't that file, but he turned in a file for his final here in this retouching class, and it was a single file. That's all it was. But it had 30,000 layers in it. He'd been working on it for over a year. So how could I look at him and say, well, that's not, oh, well, you only turned in one file. But he was like, yeah, but I've spent a year on it, and look at it, and it was all, that sounds like chaos. His stuff was all, if you know him, his stuff was all like, it was all beautifully named and organized and all that kind of stuff, whatever. And he could walk through and said, this is what I did for this, and this is why I did this, blah, blah, all of that kind of stuff. So again, this is about the amount of work, not about the number of images. And everyone in this room knows when they have done the amount of work that would be a final and not necessarily the number of images, right? So on the flip side, I've had people who do portrait work, and that's all they want to do, and they do very little. It's just a little touch-up, a little dodging and burning, maybe knock a errant hair out or something like that, and that was it. Well, in that case, it was 15 or 20 of those images. I mean, again, you all know what this is, and if so, I will say this: once we get to the point where we're really showing final work, because we start showing final work, we start showing your ideas, contact sheets, any of that kind of stuff. We start looking at what you are sort of like planning on doing kind of in like week 10, 9 or 10. So in a few weeks from now, we will actually start looking at ideas that you have to build towards your final work. Because I do not want anybody here waiting till the week before their final work to decide what it's going to be and then jump in and hope and pray. Are we good on that part? Are there questions about any of this? All right, so I do want to show you a few. So anyway, this is what, if you read this thing about this, in a couple of weeks, I think it actually might even be, starts this week. Let's not do it there, let's do it here. So, yeah, it starts here. So, we are going to be doing stuff in class today. We're actually going to start working on this assignment 5.1. We'll do most, if not all of it in class, which will give you guys an enormous break, because the only other things that are in here, there's one other knockout I want you to do, but then there's this written final project proposal. It is due in October 8th, so it's due a week from now. But again, all of this is it's 2 paragraphs. It's all you're going to do. So in paragraph 1, it's the conceptual part of what you're proposing. So it's just a brief statement about what you think you're going to actually do, explain the ideas that you have, why do you want to do this. Paragraph 2 is the logistical part of it. So let's say that I decided I wanted to do a fashion shooting for this class. That was going to be my project. So in the very beginning part, whatever, I would say, yeah, I'm planning on doing a fashion shoot. I'm planning on doing some compositing, a little bit of retouching, blah, 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 blah. And then the second part of it, of the paragraph, in paragraph part 2, is that sort of more laying out what you're going to do. Oh, I'm going to do split frequency work on this, and yeah, I'm planning on shooting it on the studio. I'm planning on using 2 models, whatever. So it's just a sort of an encapsulation, really more than anything. This is to help you begin to try to focus on what it is you think you might want to do. Are we good about that part? Now, I will say this as well. This is a fluid thing. So you are going to turn this in next week, and you could easily come to me the week after, or 2 weeks after, or 3 weeks after and say, Verser, I'm not doing that anymore. I've completely changed my mind. I'm going off and I'm going to do this. That's fine. The purpose of this is to get you thinking about this weeks before you actually have to pull it off. That's really the only reason behind it. It's not that I'm going to say to you, oh, well, you wrote on week number 5 that you were going to do this, and if you don't do that, I'm going to flunk you. It's not like that. Are we good about that part too? Okay. So anyway, that's what this whole part is about. That's the written part. If we take a look at the next part, that's just reading assignments. Okay, so any questions about any of this so far? All right, I do want to show you some examples of previous work just to give you an idea of the scope that other people do in this. I'm not going to open up a lot of these. I'm going to look at most of this through Bridge just to sort of show you kind of some of the stuff that people have done over the course. So this is kind of all over the place. Some of this work is much, much older. Some of it is relatively new. But at any rate, you can see Alex here in this stuff. He decided that he was interested in exploring pattern and architecture, but he took it in a way that he made all of these buildings mirrorless and then actually matched them all up. And so in some cases here, he's actually compositing buildings together. I mean, that was his sort of like take on it. But as you can clearly see, this has got nothing to do with fashion and beauty, so that's the reason I actually wanted to show that. If we take a look at Austin, he did some very similar stuff. In his case, he created everything in here. He built these buildings. Again, he photographed the elements that make up the building, but then he rebuilt them into buildings. This building does not really exist, but the elements do. That wall, the brick wall, that all actually did exist, but he used that as source material to put these things together. The landscape is actually real, and then he put this building into that sort of space, whatever. These were really pretty interestingly done. I think some of them were more successful than others. This looks a little artificial to me. That's not to say that the artifice is necessarily a wrong thing. I think that has to do with the intent. Do you want people to believe this is real? When I look at this, there's, again, the fact that there's no windows in it sort of gives me a clue, but it actually is done well enough that I could believe this could be a real thing, right? This is the new CIA headquarters in Gary, Indiana. No, just kidding. And this last one I thought also was actually pretty well done as well. So all of these are composited and pieces and other stuff in there. So again, nothing that really has anything to do with fashion or beauty. So I'm going to show you this one really quick. This is a person who lives in California. The last time at least I knew lives in California. He was an assistant of mine for a little while, Sean, and he was interested in doing compositing work. That was what he was doing. So this is, I'm going to show you the group of images that he used to put together and then where he finally landed with this. So this was his landscape that he'd actually shot. This was a picture that he did in the studio, and then this was the compositing to put them together. So it's really just sort of walking us through the process. This was another one. So again, it was an image. This is what he shot actually in real life. This was his background. This is what he shot in the studio, and this was his composite. So you can see they go along like this. I think, again, some of these are more successful than others. This is one that I thought was particularly successful because he employs some tricks to making the compositing a little bit more believable. Yet anyway, this is what he shot in his real thing. This is what he ultimately, the image he shot in the studio. And you can see there's a couple of tricks in here. He's actually trying to recreate stuff that he shot in the studio. So you'll see the stuff that was done in the studio. It's got railing and that kind of stuff. He tries to recreate those in the studio using C-stands and arms and that kind of thing, whatever. And then this is the composite that he actually put together. So all of those things that sort of like tricks that he can bring into all of this. Does that sort of make sense what ended up happening here? When we get into compositing, which is not too far from now, we will have a big discussion about all of this stuff. Devin I've only got a couple of him here, and unfortunately for me, I don't have the pieces he used to put this together. But this was one of the images. I'm going to open this one up just so that you guys can take a quick peek at it. So Devin became really obsessed with compositing and how you actually did, what you needed to go through to actually pull off a successful composite. So in this case, Devin, all the figures here are shot individually. So when you see this guy's arm around this girl, this has all been manipulated in a way to actually, they were not together ever. But beyond that, this is a real ambulance that was actually shot inside. He made friends with his local fire department company, where they keep, all of that, and asked them if he could shoot the interior of one of their ambulances, and they said sure. But he's rebuilt the whole outside. He shot this in a garage, and you can see he's put, nighttime backgrounds in it. Anyway, he's just, and the thing is that in order to get these to actually land in perspective, he had this enormous set of measurements about where his camera was in relation to like the cot and the bed and all of that stuff, so that he could go back into the studio and recreate that exact interior, so that when he shot the figure, they were actually in perspective, all of that. Again, if you don't know what that means, we get into perspective to death when we start getting into compositing. But anyway, this is an incredibly complicated project that was made. This is actually probably made up of 15, 20 images to actually achieve this composite. There's sort of a hyper realness about it, I think, whatever. So it's a very sort of almost, over exaggerated. He always had these like points of view that he was trying to get to. So, you sort of see the guy over on this side, there's this sort of like, pleading look and begging, something. What I mean, it's charged, I guess is all I'm trying to say, emotionally charged. But anyway, so again, all things that he had done in this class that he was then employing that had nothing to do, again, with fashion, beauty. So this was another guy who actually did stuff, and you could look at it and you could say, well, there's something that's very sort of almost, cartoonish about this kind of work. And what I would say is that, yeah, on the one hand, that might be true, but on the other hand, you can look at this stuff and you could say that this is more photo illustrative. So, this starts to move in, maybe not, depending on how well you think it's actually done. But this starts to move into that whole arena of like movie poster, that kind of stuff. If you look at any posters that come, or anything that's released for a film, those things are now all so massively composited. You cannot get two actors in the same room at the same time. You'll never be able to shoot that. So it's a whole, how do we put these people together? How do we give context to this that relates to the film? All that kind of stuff. I really felt like in some of these things, he actually was beginning to move in that direction, especially this one. But at any rate, Haley did food, and these seem pretty obvious in terms of how they were sort of like laid out and done. Again, not necessarily looking for believability, but part of that comes from the fact that you would never ever see this really. So part of the disbelief might be that it's composited well but not great, but also that the actual content of the subject matter is it's asking you to suspend belief. So again, in this case, again, more sort of an illustrative kind of thing. But I did again, in putting this together and the work that she actually ultimately pulled off, I thought it was pretty well done. So again, food. Here, this is Jacob. So this is the guy who did the one that I was telling you about, that had the the moose with the balloon. He was really into doing. He wanted to do a whole series of images that had to do with, he wanted to talk about, or wanted them to address the impact of war on children. And so he created these sort of like narratives, but also posters, but also, I'll just show you what a couple of them look like. Some of them you can see, this one is probably the most obvious in terms of really directly relating to that child and, sort of like war figure child, that kind of stuff. But he had some really beautiful stuff in here, and you can see that in many cases here, starts to get into texturing and multi-layering, and this is where he could really get into these, these just mammoth files that have 1,000 layers in them, and how he's putting all of this stuff together. I thought they were really remarkably well done. I mean, he had a very clear vision about this stuff, and he clearly cared passionately about the idea behind it. And again, that's another thing that I would say that I want you guys to feel like. I want you to care about the work that you create in this. I do not want this to be, oh yeah, I did it just for a job. These were really bizarre. These are all synthetic. So these are all textures that Jeff had found, and then he recreates these. I forget, there's a name for these things, but if you guys know MC Escher, you know this kind of work. It's sort of like these impossible dimensions. This cannot really be. This could not exist in real life. None of these could. But he was exploring these textures and creating, like this one tends to be, again, a sort of more obvious one. But there were this whole play and trip on perspective and that kind of stuff, whatever. Again, I thought that was I didn't see that one coming. I thought that was actually pretty interesting. So this, I'm going to actually open one of these up as well. I think this is the one that I have. So on the surface of this, it looks it looks relatively simple. What it seems to be happening here, but to explain to you what he really did in here, if you imagine taking a photograph and mounting it to a piece of foam core and then cutting it up and lighting it and shooting it, that's what this thing looks like. But the truth of it is, what he did is that he actually had this piece of foam core that he cut up. It had no image on it at all. He photographed that as a piece of three-dimensional sculpture, and then he took a single image and he tore it apart to reface all of the elements that are on this, which is incredibly difficult to do. You would think, oh yeah, you're just cutting it up and moving it like this, whatever. This is so incredibly hard to do, you cannot imagine. I know, because I actually worked on this one with him for I don't know how many hours. But then, after doing that, he's got to go in and then rematch all the shadow and highlight relationships between this. So again, light coming from the side, hitting this whole thing, this whole panel here has got to be brighter. This is actually tipped out of the light slightly. He had to balance all of that because this was a single photograph that was not dimensional at all. And so you look at this and you say, well, that seems so relatively simple and easy to do. These things were, I mean, he printed them, they were so fucking beautiful, you can't imagine. And again, this image right here is probably 100 hours of work. So they were really beautiful. I'm not going to go through all of these. George, I do want to show you this, and actually I'm going to open up one of these. Actually, I'm going to open both of these. So this will give you some idea, possibly. So again, these are interiors now. So you guys know the old Johnson Publishing building, the really super fascist-looking brutal building that's right on Michigan Avenue. Brown, it's a hotel now. Columbia used to own this, and when Columbia owned it, they never did anything with it, and so, but it became a place that we could actually, photo students could actually go in and shoot. And so she ended up going into this place. So it's the Johnson Publishing Company, and it was Johnson Publishing Company published Emity, and they were they were really involved in, they were like the epicenter of black creative talent in Chicago in terms of fashion, makeup industry, publishing, celebrity, whatever. I mean, they were like, was like the epicenter of it all. Anyway, the building was built in the 70s, I think, and if you take a look at the architecture, when the Johnson Company sold it to Columbia College, they didn't touch it. So when you went in, there was still a lot of stuff in there. You'll see there's a lot of stuff in there that is incredibly 70s-like decor. It was really a pretty remarkable space. However, it had been sitting vacant for I don't know how long, and a lot of the stuff had like all fallen apart and was all sort of like torn down. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So this was actually his. This was so the guy who owned it, his last name was Johnson. This was, I think, part of his office. But at any rate, if you take a look at the initial building, or her initial photograph, this is what she photographed. So this is kind of the before and after. So on its surface, what you can see that she's actually done is she's completely relit the whole right side of the building. She's turned on lights that were actually burnt out. She's done all of that kind of stuff. And that's not so much the amazing part as what I think happens right up here in this corner right here. So it was this whole glass wall structure part, but the original building part of it had actually fallen. Sorry. Had actually fallen out. Can you see this whole glass panel is out of its track right here? She moves this thing back in place in post. I saw this and I was just like, how the fuck did you do that? And anyway, it's unbelievable what she ultimately did in here. So I'm just saying, it's those kinds of things that, when you look at this, you say, well, it's so simple. She turned on a couple of lights and opened up the light in that room, and so who cares? I could have done that in a half hour. That's not a final. And then you start to see what she really did in here. The next one is sort of similar in that regard. So if you take a look at the next one here, this looks like, okay, well, it's just a typical room that, she shot these pictures in, and these doors are open, but this is what the original looked like. And to her credit, much of this she could have simply cleaned up before she photographed it, but she took this as being the challenge that she was going to go. But anyway, sorry, keep hitting the wrong button. This is actually what she did. So again, on the surface of this, you say, well, how difficult could that possibly be? Well, number one, removing all of this shit from the floor, that's not that hard to do, but recreating this pattern in perspective is monstrous in terms of how you actually do this. So you see this pattern going back, and as it goes back through all of this, the pattern gets smaller because it's going further away from the camera, right? So when you actually do that kind of retouching work, you've actually got to then, all of the pattern that's down here has got to be smaller. It's got to actually follow the same sort of like loss, as it's getting smaller to actually be believable in perspective. And then she has to match the pattern up. This is mind-numbing work. I mean, this is days and days of work. Look at the pattern on the back wall. She actually manages to get this thing pretty well done and pretty well matched up, but this is the difference. And it's not tonal. She completely replaces the wallpaper that's on the wall, but then all of this has to line up. It's unreal to get this to work. Anyway, so I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that when you look at it, it seems like, oh, this is so incredibly simple to do, but to take a quick look at her layers palette in doing all of this work, you'll get some sense of what she tackled in here. So this is where it starts out. This is just the work that she did on the carpet. And actually it's nested. This is also more work on the carpet. And we haven't even opened this all up yet. I mean, you can see if we go after all of this, this is just to get through the carpet. Yeah. Almost done. Last couple ones I'll actually show you here. So this is one that is, Josh was a fashion and beauty person, so this is sort of like the thing I think that most people sort of expect to be done. But again, the only reason I'm showing you this is that this is the kind of work he wanted to do. So this was work for his portfolio. So again, I've said this 1,000 times, even though the majority of the images that we work on here are fashion and beauty, it's because that's what I shoot and it's my images. But this is not a fashion and beauty class. This is a retouch anything class. But in this case, it happens to be fashion and beauty because this is what he actually wanted to do once he left Columbia. So, but this is going to be the before and after part right here. And I have one last one to show you. Actually, I take it back. I have two. So I don't get many graduate students in this class, only the smart ones. And this was a graduate student, Kai. He's gone on. He's doing. The last I heard, he was doing extremely well. He's living in California now. He's a fine art photographer, but at any rate, he was really interested in exploring landscape stuff. Oh, that's right. I don't have his layered file either. I got to try to find these. But This is a building that exists. This is somewhere up at Northwestern. And none of this grass, he had to put in all of the grass. None of this existed. He had to actually these buildings do exist. He didn't he didn't cobble together a group of buildings. They actually do exist. But it was shot in the wintertime. This is all lighting that he has stolen from images of this at nighttime that he brought into this. But he rebuilt the entire lawn. The lawn was just basically dirt. Completely changed the image in terms of, again, it became his vision, not the thing that he was forced to actually photograph, or he didn't accept that part. And I got two last ones to show you. This is actually one of my favorite in here. So Terry was really interested in shooting cars, and he had made all these connections all over the city with people who had really more companies who were like either selling or storing and selling really high-end cars. And so he had access to these cars, and he could actually photograph them. So he created all of these composites and brought all of this stuff in. I don't think this is not a layered file, so I don't have a before and after. But at any rate, in developing that whole relationship, he actually, this is a photograph of a model. It's an extremely expensive model. It's a highly detailed model, but this is a model that's about this big that he actually started to put into spaces around the city. And then he used this work to actually get access to the companies that had the real cars, and then he started photographing the real cars. So the whole idea of this thing, giving you some sort of career path or access that you maybe don't have right now, it worked out for spades in his case. Again, I think extremely well done. One last one and we're done. So Tim was really interested in doing more photo illustrative work, and Tim has gone on. He now actually has a company in Chicago. So Tim's company now, and it was a very clever thing to do, and the reason I bring this up is that, well, I'll show you the work in just a second, but I also wanted to plant this seed into your mind. So a lot of retouchers, they go out, if you're thinking about doing this, possibly retouching as a side hustle or even as your real hustle, as your main hustle, a lot of them you think about, okay, a photographer goes out, shoots a bunch of stuff, and they send it to me, and I fix it, or I get together, I meet with them, whatever. But it's all after the fact. And I talked to Tim about, this was all before he left. He was still a student here, and I said, there's people in New York, especially the really, really, really high-end retouchers in New York. They don't just do that. What they do is they actually show up during the shoot. They're actually on set. So there's a really famous retoucher. He does mostly fashion and beauty. He used to be a hair guy years ago. His name is Pascal. You can look him up. If you want to look him up, I forget what the name of his company was. Anyway, but what Pascal did was that he realized really quickly that he could not only be more successful in his retouching, but he could also get a whole lot more billable days by saying to the photographers that he worked for, if I'm on set, we can have a conversation about how I need you to shoot something in order to have the correct thing to then retouch after the fact. So he could go in, he did a ton of work with Stephen Meisel for Vogue, and he could go in and say, say like he wanted to do this picture, and he would say, Stephen, I need a separate shot of just the flame, and I need it against a green background so that I can isolate it out and still get transparency in it. But he was there during the shooting, so they knew the image that they were trying to get, but then he could say, I need you to shoot it this way so that I have this. Or he would say, you need to change the perspective of this. Again, you're looking down on the girl, but you're looking up at the bottle, and that's wrong. And, he could do all of that. But the real hook in all of this is that instead of him just spending one day putting the pieces of this together, he spent 4 days doing the shoot and 1 day doing this. So this turned into a 5-day booking for him, and he's still billing his $3,000 a day booking, right? But what's it worth? What would you rather do? Have a 5-day booking at $5,000 a day, or a 1 day booking at $5,000 a day? And that became the way he worked. And so then he got to the point he was so good, and people liked what he did so much, He insisted that it be that way. He wouldn't take on a job that he wasn't at the shooting. And the guy worked 7 days a week. So I'm just saying it's something for you to think about in terms of the possibilities of this. Don't just think that being a retoucher is sitting in a lonely, dark basement in the middle of the night, drinking endless Diet Cokes and Red Bull, trying to stay awake to get the job done. It can be a whole lot more than that. Make sense? Okay. But show you what Tim did on this one. Questions about any of this? So hopefully, yes. If we take a look, it's possible. Anything is possible. We can take a look at the frame and see if there's a mask on it. We can sort of tell. But yeah, it's really hard to say. My guess is that is not the case. My guess is that her arm was interfering with the rest of his composite part, and so he just eliminated because that line is too hard. Yeah. But this is still really the majority of the base image in that, and it's really shitty bad lighting and all that kind of stuff. All right. Okay, so much for that. So are we sort of feeling good about what I'm looking for in all of this when you think about your final project? Again, please, if there's nothing else, please keep in mind, focused, that I want this to be something that you can use for yourself, for your portfolio. I want this based on your work or work that you aspire to do, not based on something that you think is going to get you an okay grade in this class. All right. I've got the hard drive up here. Did everybody get everything dropped on the hard drive? So both assignments. Yes, you need this. Okay, so one of your assignments for this week is to redo Sunny. And it's to redo Sunny after we do it here. So typically what would happen in this class is that I would have graded the version that you turned in, but I can't get to it. So it's not graded yet, but that is not going to stop us. We are going to do it in class anyway. So regardless of how. So I'm going to do this together with you all. This is another one like the Castle project or the Castle assignment that we did weeks ago. This is actually going to be assignment number 5.1 is to redo Sunny, which was assignment 3.1. So if you follow along with me right now in this class and turn in the file, if you don't make any mistakes in going along this, whatever, you're going to get a really good grade for this because I'm doing this with you. And I have enough of an ego to say, well, if I showed them how to do this and then they turned in what I showed them how to do, I'm certainly not going to give them a C on that. Make sense? So I'm going to encourage everyone to please do this with us now as a collective. We are going to spend quite a bit of time because, again, the thing that I care about is that so many of the issues that we have explored up until now apply to this. So it's sort of like a recap of a lot of the issues that we've talked about in this class. And then we're going to hopefully get that done relatively fast and then move beyond it into a lot of other stuff that we're going to look at today. Everybody good on that part? Okay. So start with me. I'm going to go in and take a look at our session 5. I think there's another copy of Sunny in the session 5. If there's not, we can just go back and grab the one from before. So in the assignment folder, yep, there should be just a blank of Sunny, I hope. Can everybody find this guy? Okay, are we good on this part? So again, I'm going to move, you guys know this about me already, I'm going to move pretty quickly in this, but if you get confused about something or something, I say, oh yeah, and do this, and you look at it and you say, well, that's not working, whatever, stop me at that point. Just, hey, Verser, no, I didn't, no, wait, hang on one second, can you come over here and make sure that, because that didn't work for me, or whatever, blah, 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 blah. Is everybody good on that part? All right. So when I look at this, I'm going to start off Again, with the most challenging aspect of it, and this is where I think most people, this is the way I think I would approach this. Do not leave the hair where the hair is actually meeting that blue background. Do not leave that for last. That's actually the most challenging part in my estimation about this. If you take a look at the lines of the sweater and even to a certain extent the skin, certainly around where the skin is meeting the sweater, that kind of stuff, whatever, most of it you can do with a pen tool. That's not how I'm necessarily going to suggest it, but it's relatively simple. It's really, relatively straight lines, that kind of stuff. So, but the challenge is really the hair. The challenge is this part right back in here. So I'm going to zoom into this, and it's this. This is what I'm going to start with. So I'm going to start with separating the blue background, and then we will move on probably to the sweater, and then finally to either the hair or the skin. That's how I'm going to approach this whole thing. So is everybody ready to do this with me? Are we good? Everybody got this file open? All right, I know, right? Okay, so again, my biggest concern is this edge right here. I think that this is the most challenging part. There's one other part, if you guys did this whole edge right here where the hair meets her skin on this side is also extremely challenging, but it's why I've never changed this file. Every single retouching class in the entire existence of retouching here at Columbia College has actually done this. You will meet people who took this class 10 years ago, and all you need to say to them is, "Oh, how'd you do on Sunny?" I mean, it's like a code word. It's like the word to get into the secret speakeasy. It's like Sunny, and everybody just goes, "Oh yeah." All right. So at any rate, if you do have a tablet, you can possibly use it. You don't have to use it for a lot of this. We'll see. I'm not certain what you're going to have to do with it, so don't sweat that one too much. Again, I know I told you about that, tablet is critical. We will get into using tablet as the semester starts carrying on. It starts to become a bigger and bigger player in all this. So don't feel like I put you through all the pain to actually get this tablet software installed and then I'm going to turn around and never use it. Although I do think that'd be kind of funny. I mean, come on, convince you to put on some like major software on your computer and then we'll never use it. Right, you need to have all of this. Yeah, you need to actually, all of this, and you need to catalog it. And okay, what are we going to do with it? Oh, nothing. If you want to, anyway, you make up something. I don't know. I'm over it. Okay, so the way I'm going to approach this to begin with is I'm going to start using channels on this. Again, I think that in certain ways, channels for this really super fine detail become the best. If you've got a solid enough background to do this, sometimes you don't. If you imagine this exact same hair on a really, really busy, imagine this girl out in the middle of the woods with a bunch of leaves and shit, that are, it's fall. It's like, a bunch of leaves, all the kind of stuff. This strategy may not work for that. But again, in this case, it will work for this. It should work for this. So that's the way I'm going to go about doing this. So I'm going to start by looking at channels. So over in my channels palette, I'm going to click on and it looks like I've got some color sampler points on my image right now. So this is something I may have worked on before. Do you guys have color sampler points already down? We need to get rid of those. So because I want to just start clean here. To get rid of any readouts that you've already got, make sure that you come down and you select the eyedropper tool and then come down to the color sampler tool. And when you do that, it'll get you again. You'll have your sample size up here, the 3x3, but you'll see there's a clear all button up in the options panel up at the very top. Click on that clear all. It gets rid of any color sampler that you might have. So we're going to set our own color samplers in just a second. So with that gone, I'm now going to take a look at my channels. So I'm going to click on the red channel, and again, remember what I'm looking for here is contrast. Now, you can see that in this case, the skin is actually extremely light and the hair is extremely dark and the background's in the middle. I don't care about the skin in this at all. This is not what I'm looking for. I'm caring about the background and the hair. That's the edge that I'm working on. And I don't really care about all of the hair that's in this area and here. What I really care about is this edge. This is the only thing I'm fixated on and focusing on. The rest of this I can pretty much do manually, but this transition, this is the stuff that you need to do all of your tricks to actually pull this off. So right now when I look at this, I see relatively dark hair on a medium gray background, and I'm hoping and praying that this is not my best channel, because if it is, I know this is going to be a lot more work than I wanted it to be. Sometimes you won't know. Sometimes you'll have two channels that are extremely close to each other. If you're super anal about that stuff, you can actually put a point on the hair and a point on the background before we start doing this work, and then looking at the channels as you go through them. And again, we are looking for contrast. So any 2 points, the further away they are from each other in tone, the more successful or the less work you're going to have to do to finally build the mask based on it. So at any rate, I'm going to eyeball this one to begin with. So I'm looking at red and hoping that somebody else is better. So then I'm going to click on green, and green is definitely better. You can see the background got lighter. If I go back to the red, the hair didn't really change a lot in tone, a little bit. It also got a little bit lighter, but the background is considerably lighter on that. And then finally I'm going to click on the blue channel, and the blue channel is even better. I've got greater contrast in the blue channel. So again, ignore what's happening in her face, ignore the hair that's on the inside here. I don't care about that. It's just this edge transition, and you can see the blue background is now considerably lighter, and I've still got the hair detail in here. So I'm going to use that channel to actually build the mask for my blue background. However, before we do any of that, I'm going to double click the hand here really quickly and take a look and see what other problems I think I might have in this. So in your alls, when you actually did this work, what was the biggest challenge that you had when you were trying to separate all the pieces? The shadows on her neckline, so like this stuff in here? Yeah, okay, other things. So, on this shoulder over here. Yeah, that was another problem. Other things, yes. Oh, like in here? Oh, over in here. Okay, that's another good one. Yeah. Other things. Bingo. For me, this is this stuff right in here. This is the thing that kills everybody, right? I mean, it's just like, oh my God. And the reason this is so challenging is that if you take a look at you can take a look at the tonal ranges, the difference in here. So you can put your eyedropper over the hair and you'll see it's a dark tone. It doesn't have a whole lot of color in it. And then you can see the skin is actually extremely close to in the very same color. There's just not a lot of difference. And so sometimes you can have a real difference based on color. Sometimes you can have a real difference based on tone. One of the advantages of using the Select and Mask workspace is that it allows you to actually employ both of those things to try to build a mask. That's really hard for us to do manually here. So I have a different strategy when I look at this. So I need everybody to zoom into the hair that's on her, that's on the forehead right in here. This stuff that's right in here. This becomes really incredibly challenging to pull off. So my first strategy before I start the blue background is that I'm going to create what I call a new virgin. So virgin to me means that you need something in your image. Well, number one, this is a virgin right here. You cannot, this is an unretouched layer that I've got here. I haven't done anything to it at all, and that will always stay that way. That is actually sacrosanct to me. But I'm going to create a new virgin that'll allow me, it's something that I'm going to use for all of the other layers that I work on, but it's going to eliminate this hair problem to begin with. So your first move into here is to select the background layer in your layers palette and hit Command J. It will actually create a brand new layer for you. I'm going to double click on the name, the layer 1, and I'm going to rename it MV. That stands for New Virgin. And then I'm going to fill in all this hair. I'm not going to fuck with this. Why on earth would you do that? I'm going to eliminate the skin behind it, and then I don't have to select it. You need to start thinking like that. If you hit this insurmountable problem, what is another tactic that you can use to get around that? You cannot look at this and say, well, my only solution is to be able to select the skin that is underneath all of that hair. That cannot be your only solution. So, are there clients that would balk at that? Sure there are, but that is not, I'm not one of them. So that was something that you could have employed in this assignment. So that's exactly what we're going to do. To start that, you're going to hit the S key. That will give you this clone stamp tool. If you can't remember that, look at the toolbar that's on the left-hand side. It's about a little more than a third of the way down. It looks like a stamp. If you click on it, again, it's got multiple tools under the icon. So if you click on the lower right-hand corner, you'll get a flyout menu. You have the clone stamp tool or the pattern stamp tool. You want to make sure you're working with the clone stamp tool. Then immediately your eyes should go up to the options bar that's sitting up at the very top. The first thing we're going to look for is the type of brush, so the edge of my brush. So I'm going to click on my drop-down menu, and when you click on your drop-down menu, or on the little down arrow that's pointing next to the brush preview, you should get this big long-ass fly-out menu. Does everybody have this big long fly-out drop-down menu? I want to take a look there at a couple of things just to make sure everybody understands what we should be doing and what we should be working with here. You will see that underneath there's a series of brushes that sit right up here at the top. These brushes that sit up right here at the top, this is like the recent brushes that you've used. So that's all that's going on here. If we change a different brush, it will get put up here. One of the oldest of the brushes here will go away. The newest brush will go. I don't use this thing at all. It's really sad. It used to be you could actually select what stayed up here. You can't do that anymore. So anyway, ignore these things that are up here at the very top. Underneath it, you should have a series of folders. You can collapse them all. And so I'm going to collapse all of mine. So this is the folders that I've got actually here. Some of you may have different ones, but everyone should have this general brushes up at the top. Does everybody have that? However, does everyone have legacy brushes here? No one does. They don't ship this anymore, but they give them to you. So you can load brushes from, there's a gazillion brush sets that are out there. So you'll notice here, I've also got one down here, a Pix Imperfect hairbrush. Pix Imperfect is one of the few websites that I go to on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel, whatever. The guy's, his first name is Amish. I can never pronounce his last name. He does extraordinary work. We'll look at some of his stuff later. I'll direct you to those when we get more into the retouching part of it. But anyway, this is a set of brushes that he created and then shared. Yes? That's exactly where I was heading. No, but hey, everybody needs a TA, right? So thanks, Mark. Anyway, so to get to the legacy brushes, to actually add them, I'm going to move this thing to the side, click on that drop-down menu again, and then come up. Why do I think this whole thing is covering that? Where did you see the add brush part? Because I'm missing, oh, right here. It's the plus thing right here, or it's the wheel. So yeah, it's the wheel icon that's at the very top. So my image was actually covering that screen. So if you go to the little gear that's at the very top, can everybody find that little gear? Click on this little gear to drop down, and you can actually do legacy brushes, or right down at the very bottom. So that's how you add legacy brushes. Go ahead and add yours. I'm not going to add mine again because it'll probably do it twice. And then also, if you take a look at import brushes, if you click on this, you can actually, it'll open up a dialog that'll allow you to, so if somebody saves a set of brushes that you can actually then go find, this is where you can go find them, and you can actually open them and add them. I'm not going to add any more here. If you click on the drop-down menu again, there's another place where you can append default brushes. And so then it'll say, oh, yeah. So we can actually append another set of defaults underneath what we've got right here. We don't need to do that because that'll just give you a twin set of them. So I don't want to do that part. But anyway, this is where you do stuff in here. If you create your own brushes, you can actually put them in your own group. So you would click a group and it's called Verser's brushes and put your brushes in there. So it's basically a way to organize this whole mess that's over here. We all good on that part? Great. So even though you've added your legacy brushes, we will talk about those later. We're not going to use them today. Well, I want you to open up general brushes. So when you click on the open up part for general brushes, you should see at the very top, soft round, hard round, soft round, hard round, soft round, hard round. That should be your first 6 brushes right here. Does everybody have those? Okay, if you click on the soft round one at the very top, you'll see what it does is that it doesn't really change the size of your brush at all, but it just changes the hardness to be to 0. So it's zero hardness. So it's a very soft edge. Does that make sense, everybody? The really soft edge part. You'll also, if you hover over it, if you do it long enough, there's a little tag that'll come up and say what this is, and it just says a soft round brush. So if you go to the next one down and click on it hard round, you'll notice that it changes your hardness all the way up to 100%. Then if you go to the next one and you hover over it, it looks like the same as the initial one. It's a soft round brush, However, if it goes, you'll see it's setting as soft. It is still a round brush here, but you can see underneath it, it says pressure size. What that means is that the greater the pressure you use on your tablet, the bigger your brush gets. The softer the pressure you put on it, the smaller your brush is, the bigger it actually gets. I strongly suggest when you first start working with these tablets, you do not set that up here. There's other places in Photoshop you can set this similar behavior. Don't do it here, because the problem is that you'll forget you've done it, and then your brush will look like it's really big on your Photoshop where you're supposed to be painting or doing something, but then depending on your pressure, it completely changes, and all of a sudden you're like, well, fuck, it's way too small, and it's like, well, no, I got to press harder, and then you press harder, and then it's bigger than the brush it's just agony waiting to happen. Do not do this. When you've been doing this kind of tablet work for a year or two and you start to want to explore that, there are people who get really good at this. They get a really good feel for this. This is not about developing feel for tablet class. This is about retouching class. So start with the training wheels, walk before you run, all of those cliches apply here. Are we good on this part? The next one down under it is the same exact thing, except it's a hard edge. But again, the brush controls the size. The next one down under it, the soft round pressure, opacity, what this is that how much ink is actually being laid down. The softer you touch your brush to your tablet, the less ink that gets put down. The heavier you press on it, the more ink that gets put down. Don't use this either, not either one of them. These 6 are the only brushes that you should be considered using for this whole class. Unless you're a real pro at using a graphics tablet before, you already know what you're doing, and I don't have to teach you anything about that. The only 2 you should be using are right up here at the very top, the soft round and the hard round. So, again, all of these changes, the changes that we make about brush behavior, we actually control that in Photoshop in a different place, not in these brush tips. Does that make sense, everyone? Questions? Okay, last thing I will say about this is that check this out. If you click on the very top one, so I'm going to click on the soft round, and you'll see it sets your hardness to 0, and you have this blue line that goes around it. But if you click and drag the hardness slider up to 50%, now this is neither a hard brush nor a soft brush, this is right in the middle. You will notice that that blue around here changes. It's still selected, so it's still saying you've got a soft round brush selected, but that change from a blue to a yellow to an orange border, that's telling you that even though you picked this brush, you went in and modified it. You can even crank this thing all the way up to 100%. Now you are working with a soft brush that you've changed to 100% hardness, so it's a completely hard brush, but it looks like you've selected the soft one. Now, I don't think that Photoshop should actually allow you to do this. I think that this should become more evident that this is what's going on, but they don't do that. So what can I tell you? The trick to it is, or the solution to it is, forevermore in this class, right now, select the very top of the general brushes, and then forevermore, don't select another brush. Modify your brush up here at the top. If you want a hard brush, make it a hard brush. Ignore the fact that it says something different here. All you're wanting to do is be able to control this. There are times where I work with a 50% brush. There's times where I work with a 30%. There are times where we will work with an 80, 85%. I don't want to get into all of this preset stuff here. I don't care about that stuff. But what you want to make sure is that you didn't accidentally select this one, which now invokes pressure to control the size of your brush. Are we good on this part? So select the very top one. You can then collapse the general brushes if you want. I don't really say to do that. I still think you should have this open and available to you. But this is where we're going to control the hardness or the softness of our brush. In this case, we're going to keep the brush completely soft. Then if you want to get rid of that flyout menu without touching your image, which you do, you simply click on this upper part of your menu. So here, I'll show you again. I'm going to click on, I've got the flat out menu. If you click near the word that says Adobe, it will collapse. This is true of everything, but you will not make a mark on your image. The problem that we have is that if you come over and click on your image, that flyout menu will go away, but you will have actually laid down a brush. Whatever your brush is doing, it will actually, that when you clicked on the image to get rid of that menu, it will actually do the mark, which you don't want to have happen. The next one over is opacity. So again, opacity controls how much of the impact of the effect that we're actually having in here. Flow, how many in this room know the difference in opacity and flow? Wow, they're doing a bang-up job in Photo Practice 3, aren't they? Fucking tell you every gallery you can go to, but don't tell you anything about the simplest, most basic thing in Photoshop. Fuck me. All right. I need everybody to make a synthetic file. This is going to take longer to get through than I planned on. So I need everybody to make a synthetic file. So Command N to bring up the new dialog box, or go up to the File menu and come down to New. This dialog box will open again. If you've changed yours to use the legacy new dialog box like I had, this was the last time I'm going to tell you this, to use the old legacy, the legacy dialog box for a new file. I use the old version. I think it's more feature rich and less confusing. If you're using the new one, good luck. Go ahead. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm going to change my drop-down menu from pixels to inches, and I'm going to make a 10 by 8 image. I'm going to do a resolution of 300 ppi. It's going to be an RGB color and 8-bit. And in my color space, I'm going to change that to Adobe RGB because that's the color space that I'm working in. And I'm going to say OK. So it opens up this color space here. Then I'm going to hit the B key. The B key stands for just a normal brush. Earlier, when I was looking at that general brush drop-down menu, it was for the clone stamp tool, but now it's going to be for just a regular brush. Again, if you click on that drop-down menu, you can see that there's a hardness slider and a softness slider. It's actually selected the same one, or this one is actually now, it's actually a hard brush that's actually had its hardness set to 0. So again, that's why we've got the orange line around it. That part doesn't really matter to me. Again, I only focus on the parts that are up at the very top. So I'm going to click on the word next to Adobe Photoshop to get that menu to get that to go away. I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. Black is now my foreground color. If white is your foreground color, you want to hit the X key. The X key flips your background color, black and white, or whatever they are. Let's say your background color was green and your foreground color was red, and you hit the X key, it would flip those two. So anyway, I just want to make sure I want to be painting with black on a white background. And then finally, I'm going to hover over my cursor, and you'll see that I've got my dot in the middle, my target in the middle, with the size of the brush. If you use the bracket key, now there is all sorts of heads-up display that you can use to change the size of your brush, the hardness of your brush, all that kind of stuff. If you're that kind of person, great, use it. I'm not. I'm just going to go old school. So again, for me, it's direct. I've already told you I don't have the memory for that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to use the bracket keys just to the right of the P key to make my brush size, to control my brush size. So the bracket that is immediately to the right of the P key is the open square bracket. That makes your brush smaller. If you go to the one next to that, the closed square bracket key, it makes your brush larger. So I'm just going to make it large enough that I can sort of see. It's about the size of a dime on my screen, on my laptop screen right here. If you want your image to be as big as it can be, again, without covering any of your palettes, simply double click on the hand. It'll now be that big. However, now the hand has also been selected. So hit the B key again to go back to your brush. And then make sure that up at the very top that you have a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and 100% flow. And then we're simply going to click and drag across. And you can see it lays down 100% black ink with a very soft edge. If we then go up to our drop-down menu and come and grab the hardness slider and make it 50%, again, click outside of the fly-down menu, but not on your image, to get rid of that, and come right underneath it and drag across. You can see that my brush has now got a soft edge, but it's not as soft as the first one that I did. And then finally, I'm going to do this one more time and drag it all the way to 100% hardness. And again, click on this to get the flat menu to go away, and click and drag across. So this is the difference in your hard and soft edge. And you can see the very first one that we did was very soft. The next one we did a little bit harder. And the next one we did right now is completely hard. If you hold down the Command key and you hit Command Z once, it will get rid of your last move. If you hit Command Z again and you're using the legacy undo like I use and like we set up in our very first class, you simply go back and forth between these two states. If you are not using that old one and you're using the new version of undo, you will have continued to go back and gotten rid of all of your strokes. If you are using the old version like I do, in order to continue to go back, you have to add the Option key. So Command Option Z will allow you to go back in history all the way back to when you created the image or you opened it. The opposite holds true in the new Legacy version. They just flipped it. That's all they did. Are we good on this part? Yes. Chloe. Yes, it can be. So if it's we can actually look at it right now. To see what's actually going on, I'll show you what Chloe's actually talking about here. If you come over to your window menu and you come down to brush settings, so I want everybody to do this with me. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but it'll at least show you what's really going on. In your brush settings, there are ways that you can modify your brushes much more than just doing hard or soft in here or having that little part right here. And it tends to be your spacing right here. So if you say at the very bottom, so this is now the brush that I'm working with right now. If you take a look, I've got the brush shape is selected up at the very top. These are different ways. You'll see if you click on all these elements that are on the right-hand side, they tend to have an impact on, you get controls on them. But it just at the very top one, the brush shape, you can sort of see the size that it's actually got. You can see the hardness it's got, but your problem is spacing. So if you take your spacing and you click and you drag it way out, you can actually get this. So if you wanted to do a series of dots, this is a way to do it. So I'm going to crank my spacing up to like 150. And then again, to get rid of their flyout menu, simply click up in the menu near the word Adobe. It gets rid of that. And now as you paint across, you get these little dots like this. Most of the settings, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to hit, again, Command Z to undo that. I'm going to come back up to that window menu, back to my brush settings. Where are you? And I'm going to change my spacing. In most cases, if you set it down to a 25, I think is the standard for brushes. And the only difference that you get in this, so you can see that there's a little bit of a scalloping along the edge when you get down to around a 25. The reason that you have spacing is, number one, you really can use it to spread your stuff out. So this becomes important when we're, for instance, when we're trying to paint in things like grass or stuff like that, and where you really want stuff varied, you don't want it to all be together, you use this to actually pull apart your strokes without having to go in and hit a single stroke for every grass blade. It's things like that. The standard for Adobe, for the most part, I think, in most of their standard brushes actually is set to a spacing of 25. The only reason you would, if you crank it down to 0, you'll see that you get a perfectly smooth thing, which is what most people would expect. However, what you need to realize here is that you are laying down now 20 times the number of small little dots as you had when you had your spacing at 25, and it's really processor intensive. So if you've got a computer that's not really a robust, serious-ass, kick-ass graphics card, kind of computer, whatever, you'll notice lag. Your computer will start to slow down. You'll struggle with it. So this is why you can change it down to this. I'm going to leave mine probably around a 20. That seems like a good number for me. It's still pretty smooth. It gives me what I want, but it's not so overly processor intensive. Again, I can get rid of my flyout menu now by clicking out of it. You can get rid of it altogether. To get rid of it, tear it off. Again, we just grab the tab to tear it off. Click on it to undo it, and I'm going to get rid of my brushes as well. And then we're going to go back to where we were before. So if you click and you drag across, again, you basically got just, is your spacing much better now? The edges are better. What do you remember what it was set to? Yeah, 25. That's kind of the standard for it. But again, unless you're doing painting like this, you don't really pick that up. If you're just trying to like dodge and burn and do those sorts of things, you won't see that edge. All right. So at any rate, so this is actually laid down 100%. So I'm going to hit right underneath this. I'm going to change my opacity to 50%. So if you hover over your opacity slider, you can click and you can drag. This would be a good time for a tablet. So if you've got a tablet, because we're doing brushwork right now, this would be a good time to actually fire your tablet up if you have it. If you don't have it, you can still do this with a trackpad. Don't worry, it's not the end of the world. I'll wait. I'm going to undo this really quickly because we're going to start from scratch. All right, are we ready? Okay, so up at the very top, click and drag across. That's 100%. If you hover over the word that says opacity up at the very top, you will get the scrubby slider. It's a finger with an arrow pointing both right and left. That means you can actually click on the word and drag to the left and it will lower your opacity, or drag to the right and it will raise it. I find this easier to use than anything else. It's not the only way to change your opacity though. You can actually click on the word opacity and go in and type it in that you want. You can click on the little arrow right next to it and you get a drop down slider that will also allow you to control your opacity. Or if you're really quick and good about this stuff, you can actually hit like the 6 key and it will change it to 60%. You can hit the 8 key, it'll change it to 80%. You can hit the 5 key, it'll change it to 50%. You can start doing tricks like that. I use the scrubby slider for everything, so I'm just gonna do that. So with the scrubby slider, I want you to watch my screen and then I want you to do the exact same thing. I'm going to click and drag across, and you can see now this is a middle gray. It's halfway between black and white, but I'm just going to keep going back and forth. And you see, as you go back and forth, you're not building any density at all. You are simply going back and forth. You're not laying down any ink at all once you've laid down the initial ink. If you go outside of the lines, you'll actually add that same 50% outside the lines. But as I go back and forth here, I'm not building any density at all. In order to build density, I have to take my stylus off, or my finger off the trackpad, or your hand off the mouse. You need to release this, and then you can start to paint a second time, and this time you will actually go back and paint a second time. But again, you can see if you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, you do not build any more density than the first stroke laid down. What you'll also notice, and this is the thing that most people don't understand, is that you know that when you laid down the 50% part first, it put down the 50% gray, but now you're laying down the next 50%, and everybody thinks, well, okay, I'm laying down 50%, it should be black. 50% plus 50% is 100%, it should be black. That is not how Photoshop calculates opacity. What Photoshop is doing is it's looking at the color of your brush, which is black, but then it's looking at what you're painting on, and it's saying, okay, I'm gonna go halfway between the color of his ink, black, and the color he's painting on, which is already 50% gray. So my result is halfway between those two. So it's now, this is a 75%. If I start to add to this, I'm going to click and throw another one down. You still are not at completely black right now. What you now are is you are halfway between black and 75%, because that was the ink that I'm accumulating as I put down. Does that make sense, everyone? But the real issue here is that as you continue to go back and forth, you're not building any sort of opacity at all. We all good on this part? All right. So Command Option Z, 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 Z to get rid of all of that. So that's what opacity is all about. I'm going to crank my opacity all the way back up to 100%, and now I'm going to take my flow and I'm going to drop my flow down to 50%. So what flow is it's actually ink over time. This brings in a time element to this. So with the time element, I'm going to do the very same trick that I did before. I'm going to click and drag across, and it lays down, but you can see it's already starting to lay down a much heavier amount of ink, because of the amount of time it took me to make that stroke. What you'll find about flow is that typically, I cannot remember the last time I worked with flow that was above 15%. And people will say, well, oh God, I work with 1% flow all the time. And people will say, well, that's just ridiculous. It's just way too weak. Check this out. I'm gonna hit Command Z to get rid of that guy. I'm gonna drop my flow down to 5%. And then I'm going to just start going back and forth. And again, I am never lifting my cursor up off of this, but you can see, unlike opacity, my back and forth motion is continuing to build opacity. And the longer I do this, the deeper this ultimately gets. And so you can see, this allows you to build density over time without ever lifting your mouse or your cursor or your stylus up off of the background. Does that make sense, what's going on here? Right now, I'm going to go underneath it, and I'm going to just simply put and hold my cursor down. I'm not going to move it at all. And you'll see it puts down a very light density, but nothing else happens. If you jiggle it around a little bit, you'll notice that you do start to build opacity, but that becomes a real pain in the ass. Nobody actually does that part. So instead, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to come up next to my flow. You'll see there's a little icon right then next to it that looks like, well, it's supposed to look like an airbrush. So what this is going to do is that this is going to add a time element that is not based on stylus motion. So if you click on that to add it, I still have a normal brush with black ink, 100% opacity, but a very low flow. But now I'll just click on, again, I'm going to put that dot down again. I'm going to click, but I'm not going to move. And you can see over time, without me doing anything, because I've implemented that airbrush icon, it will actually lay down ink. So it doesn't mean I don't have to move. It's actually an additional part of this. I personally, there may be times to use this, but it isn't really in the majority of the retouching that we do. You're not going to want to use that airbrush feature. So uncheck that guy to take it off. But that is now the difference between flow and opacity. Questions about this? You can close that file up. We don't need it anymore. Back to our image. The S key to get to the clone stamp tool. Immediately I go up and I check my edge. So on the edge of my S key right here, I want it to be a completely soft brush. But this is one of the tricky things about completely soft. This starts getting into our retouching part. So this is going to be a precursor for this. The problem that I have with using a completely soft brush when I'm using the clone stamp tool, anybody in this room not know the clone stamp tool, don't know anything about it, never worked with it? Yeah, pretty much you all know this. The problem with the clone stamp tool is this, is that when you use a really soft brush, what it does is at the edge of that, as the brush starts to get very soft, it does not put down 100% new texture. It only puts down a texture that's beginning to fall off. So to show you what I really mean by that, let's try this. Yeah, I'm gonna keep my, let's make it a completely soft brush because we need to exaggerate this. Okay, so I've got a completely soft brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. To use the brush, you hover over something in your image. So I'm going to double click on the hand on mine so that I can see my NV again. I'm going to zoom in close to her eyeball so that you can actually see what I'm doing right here. Hit the S key and I'm going to sample just her skin. I'm going to cover part of her eye using her skin. That's what I'm going to do. So if you hold, the way you actually use this brush is that you establish your source point for new texture. So I'm going to replace her eyeball with some skin. So I'm going to hover over this bridge part of her nose, hold down the Option key, and you will see that your cursor changes to a targeting tool. Click. That actually sets your source point. And then as you come over to your image, we are going to change we're just going to do one stroke across her eye. So I'm just going to click and drag across her eye, and you can see it's replaced the texture that was her eye with skin texture. But look at the edge of your brush, or the edge of what's happening here. If you zoom into this area right here, you can see that there is a transition that's happening. I'm going to get rid of that brush so it doesn't give me the preview. There's a transition that's happening right here. In this area that's right in the middle, it's 100% new texture. It's completely covered the eye. But in this area right in here, this transition, it is now a mixture of the old texture of the eye and the new texture of the skin. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? This is how you fuck up skin. How many of you people use the clone stamp tool to retouch skin? Can't help but fuck up the skin because you are mixing old texture with new texture. It is the worst way in the world that you can retouch. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and instead I'm going to change this, again, S key again, and I'm going to change this to a completely hard brush. So 100% hard brush, and I'm going to do the very same trick again. So in this case, I don't have that problem because the edge is 100%. I go from the new skin texture at 100% to the old one immediately. So I've avoided the problem. I'm not mixing old texture with new texture, but you could spot this across the room with somebody having thrown chlorine in your eyeballs. you can't avoid this. So that also isn't the way to retouch. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on here? Okay, so just so that you guys know what's going on here, what I'm trying to get away with here. So I'm going to Command Z to undo that, and I'm actually now going to zip back out and go up next to her hair and deal with the part that I'm trying to deal with. So on her hair part right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use somewhere right in the middle. I can't use a completely soft brush in the clone stamp tool because it will mix texture in her hair, and that you can spot that. But I also can't use a completely hard brush because then it'll just look like I cut out a patch and laid it on top of that. So I'm going to split the middle. I have a career as an art director. You know this is true, right? So I'm going to go to a 50% hardness. 50% hardness for my brush. Art directors, you know, you'll say to them, "Do you want this lighter or darker?" And they'll go, "Well, let's do both." I always think about this. I used to live in Italy. I used to live in Milan, and whenever you would come in, we used to ski up in the mountains, and whenever you would come in to the first ring road from the north, as you started to come in, there was a local airport that was very close to Milan called Linate, and you get to the first ring road, and there was a line, there was a big sign that says Linate, and it had an arrow pointing left and right, and that's the way I think. It's like that. If I was an art director, I would have that tattooed on my forehead. Anyway, so I'm ready to go on this. So I'm going to actually click over to the side here. I'm just going to sample. I'm going to set a new sample source point on the side over here. Make sure that you're working on your NV layer. Also in this, I'm going to restrict this to my current layer. It's another option that you can set for when you're working with this clone stamp tool. You can set it to working on current layer or current and below or all layers. We'll talk about what those are, but for the time being, you can either do current layer or current and below. It doesn't matter because we don't have any transparency in this. So I'm going to do current layer. I'm going to start on this side over here to set my source point. So I'm going to hold down my Option key. I'm going to click, and then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to just start to paint. And I'm painting down to try to hide all of that other hair, the skin that I don't want to deal with. And so at first glance, this looks okay. Does anybody see a problem with this? Totally, it's a repeating pattern. It's the biggest problem with the clone stamp tool. This curl that is right here is repeated right here. And anybody who knows what they're doing will look at this and say, well, that's exactly what they did. They just clone stamped this out. So this is not the best way to do patches like this. There's a much better way, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I am going to zip back out so that I can see the entire image. Now I'm going to hit the lasso tool. I'm going to grab the lasso tool. So hit the L key for the lasso tool. You need to look up here and make sure that the lasso that you've got is actually the one that we normally use, the regular lasso tool, that you don't have this magnetic one or the polygonal one that's left over from when we demoed the lasso tool, because they are sticky. And I'm going to select all of this girl's hair. People who first start doing this, because what we're going to do is we're going to patch this thing instead. But what people do is that they make the mistake of actually selecting too small of selection for the patch. You can always throw away part of your patch if you need to, but adding to a patch that you've somehow modified is a nightmare. So look at my screen, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to start right around her eye, and I'm going to just draw. I take my tool all the way outside of my image. You'll notice that it's still drawing on the very outside edge. I'm going to come back in. So look at the selection that I have got. It is every single bit of hair on the left-hand side that I can get. I don't have any on the right-hand side, but that wouldn't help me out anyway. But I didn't do this. This is what a lot of people will do, is this. Take a look at my screen. They'll just do this. Oh yeah, I'm going to select that. And then they find out that this isn't big enough to cover the area that they wanted, so then they've got to do it again, or they've got to go back in time, or anyway, it's a nightmare. Don't do that. Command Z to undo that. I'm going to select the whole thing again, and I'm going to hit Command J to jump this to its own layer. So now I've got a patch that I can use. However, I need to avoid the problem that we just had. I do not want a repeating pattern. So to do that, to break that up, I need to change as much about the patch as I can change to basically create new hair. So the first thing I'm going to do is transform it. Command T. That brings up the transform dialog box. If you want to avoid clicking on the center point in the middle. If you do not see this center point in the middle, that's a problem. You need to come up and click on the check mark up in the top of your options palette to make sure that you do see this is the target, this is the So any transforms that we do will be done around this point. So for instance, if you bring your cursor outside of the bounding box, you will see that you get a double-headed arrow. If you click on that, you will see that this patch is removing around this anchor point right in the middle. If we change that anchor point to a different place, it will revolve around that different place. We don't need to do that right now. We just need to do this part. So first thing I do is throw in an angle. Now, most of the hair you'll see is going from the center of the image down to the lower left-hand side. So I want my change in my patch to still go in that direction. I do not want to do this, because this then will mean my patch hair is moving counter to all of the other hair that exists. So again, I'm going to crank it so it moves a little bit like this. If you click inside the middle of the image, do not touch on the anchor point. If you click on the anchor point, you will actually move the anchor point, not the patch. I want to move the patch. So if you click anywhere else inside of here, you can click and drag it out more into the middle of your image, which is what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to come on the bounding box on the bottom, and I'm going to click and I'm going to push it in to make my patch skinnier. Then I'm also going to click and make it considerably taller. I'm going to do both the bottom and the top. So I'm stretching this out. So this curl right here still looks somewhat the same as this, but it is not the same because I've completely distorted this. Does that make sense to everyone? Great. Then I'm just going to click and move this in the general spot over the overhead. You do not need to worry about where this is exactly. Just get it in the general area to cover the thing that we're trying to fix. Did that work for everyone? All right. Then if you take a look up at the top of your options bar, on the far right-hand side, there'll be a circle with a slash through it. That means if you click on that, it'll undo your transform. If you click on the check mark right next to it, though, it will actually go ahead and put it in. So now we've got a patch that's actually covering it. However, I don't know where it is. I don't know the area that I need to cover. All of that's missing for me. So to fix that, I'm going to put a layer mask on this, but I'm going to put a black layer mask on this to hide all of this. I'm not getting rid of it. I'm merely hiding it. Who in this room is still got questions about masking? What do masks do? So the old adage is, so when you're talking about it, you can have a black mask, you can have a white mask, or you can have shades of gray in between, right? So what they'll basically say is black conceals, white reveals. Right now, we have no mask on there. If you simply add a mask, so again, the icon that's down at the very bottom of your layers palette, the box with the circle in the middle, if you click on that, it adds a white mask. All of the patch is still showing. If the mask is selected, and mine is, you can see the brackets are around it. If you hit Command I, it will invert your mask. It just made it black, and now you can't see the patch. It's still there, but you can't see anything because the mask is hiding it. Does that make sense? If we actually filled that mask with a 50% gray, you would see half of the patch, and then half of the image that's underneath it. To see what that really looks like, with your mask still selected, you can actually, in your properties panel now, it's not showing the property of the image, it's actually showing the properties of the mask. You can actually drop the density of your mask down to 50%. That will be exact middle gray. And you can see what it looks like on your screen, and your mask actually changed that, but now you can see. You see half of the new patch and half of the old hair. Is this making sense, everybody, what's going on? All right, I don't want this to be like that. I'm going to crank it all the way back up. So, a number of ways to actually have a black mask on here. I'm going to throw my black mask away really quickly, so simply click and drag it to the trash. When you do that, it'll actually open up a dialog and it'll say, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to apply it, delete it, or cancel this whole operation? Again, if you apply it, it is a destructive move. You don't ever want to apply a mask. Instead, well, not ever. There's very few occasions, and I will tell you what those are. But in this case, we simply want to delete it. So to add a black mask now, you have options. The fastest way to do it is simply hold down the Option key when you click on the Add Mask icon at the bottom. It simply adds a black mask. If you can't remember that, I'm going to hit Command Z to undo it. Go ahead and add a white one, and then look at your properties panel up at the top. You will actually see that one of your properties up at the top is an invert button, which means you can click on it and it'll make it a black mask. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. You could also select this thing and come up to the Edit menu and come down to Fill. And in the drop down under Fill, you could actually fill it with your foreground color, which is black. You can use the drop down menu here to come down to black and fill it with black. There's a million ways you can get to it. I would just suggest Option key, click on it, it adds a black mask. Without the Option key, it adds a white one. This is working for everyone. All right. The B key to get back to your brush. Immediately check the hardness of this brush. I'm going to do a 50% hardness on my brush. Again, this is the compromise that I'm making for the edge. 100% opacity, 100% flow. And then I'm going to make my brush smaller. So it's about the size of this. I'm going to zoom in on the hair part that's right into here. Black is my foreground color. I can paint black on this all day long. Nothing will happen because I'm painting black on a black mask. I need to paint white to reveal this. So X key gives me white as my foreground color. And then you only want to trace the area where you need to fill this part in. So I'm going to start up at the very top, and I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to come down and fill in these parts. Stay away from the edge. I'm not going to try and change anything over here on the edge. If it's not working for you, like I'm picking up more skin in this one, don't worry about this. We just need to know where the mask needs to be revealing this stuff. So I'm going to continue to work my way down here like this. I'm going to fill in that part right there. I'm also going to fill in a little bit of the edge down in here. So this is what I've done right now. However, it's not doing a complete job of that. I haven't hidden all the hair, but I've got another problem here really quick. Hover over your mask, hold down the Option key, and click on the mask, and it will show you the mask. What is my problem with this mask? If I am trying to replace hair, I have started hair, look at this right here. I've started hair right in the middle of her fucking head. This is brand new hair starting in the middle of nowhere. Hair does not grow like that. Hair starts at your scalp and goes all the way till it doesn't be hair, till it doesn't be hair anymore. Oh my God. I grew up in Kentucky, if you didn't know that, where you can still get divorced and be brother and sister. You're allowed to have those jokes if you're from Kentucky. Anyway, so even though I don't need a patch up here, I can't have hair that starts in the middle of nowhere. So I'm not even looking at my image. I just know that I need to continue this to the edge of my image. So I'm simply going to take my brush and go all the way to the top. Now I don't worry about hair starting in the middle of nowhere. And I gotta tell you, I see 1,000 of these when you guys retouch. And it's just like, it starts in the middle of nowhere. It's like brand new hair. Wow, where did that come from? Oh, I just have really freaky hair. It just starts growing in the middle of other hair. So anyway, to go back to see the image again, simply hold down your Option key and click on the mask again. So now I've got the mask is in the correct place. If you want to see the patch that we're doing, you can turn this on and off. However, take a look at my screen really quickly. You can see there's an area right in here that I'm actually missing. In my new patch, I brought back skin. So what I need to do is I can't move my patch. It's in the right spot. The mask is actually in the right spot. What I need to do is leave the mask alone because it's the area that I want to have covered. I just need to move the patch itself, the pixel part. If you take a look at these two, you'll notice that there is a icon that sits between the mask and the pixel content. That icon is a lock. If you click on this, you will unlock it. Then if you select the pixel content, not the mask, so now I've selected the pixel content, the borders around it. I'm going to hit the V key to get the move tool. How did that happen? The V key to get the move tool without that link. And now make sure that you've got the pixel content, the borders are around that. Now you can actually move this around and you can see that you can actually change what you want to be the patch that goes under it. It doesn't end there. You can actually still transform this. So in my case, my patch is not wide enough. So again, with the link broken, we will only be transforming the pixel content, not the mask. Command T to bring up the pixel content, and I'm just going to make it a little bit wider. Scooch this over a little bit more, make it a little bit wider still. I'm going to rotate it a little bit more so that feels a little bit better for me right there. I don't like this patch part because, again, it's the repeating pattern up here. So I'm going to shift the whole thing up to get rid of that part and rotate this around and bring this in. But you guys get where this whole thing is actually going, correct? I still am bringing back a bit of this part. It's different in its shape than this part, but I'll take care of that in just a second. But it looks like it's doing a pretty good job for me right now, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to this by clicking on the check mark. So I don't really like this little part that's up in here. It's just a little too much about, it looks like it's starting in the middle of nowhere right here. So I'm going to hit the B key again to get a brush. I'm going to go back to my layer mask. I'm going to hit the X key to get black as my foreground color, and I'm going to erase part of that part right there until I feel like a little bit better about that. X key again to bring back a slight bit more of that, to bring that in so it sort of begins to close out. And then I'm going to move it just a little bit more. And that's beginning to work for me now. So I'm going to leave that at this part right here. I'm going to double click on the hand and make sure I've got everything that I wanted to get out of this. And I feel like I did. That part works. So now I need to truly make this the new version. So to do that, with your top layer selected, you hit Command E. It merges your top layer down into the new version. It does not rename that new version file. It leaves it as is, but this is now a complete whole. Did that work for everyone? So now if you said, well, Verser, I still have a problem. Look at that janky shit right there on her hair right here. This part right in here where you tried to fluff that part, that does not work for me at all. And I'll say, fine, okay, it doesn't work for you. I would agree. L key to get the lasso tool. Select a really big issue of hair right here. Command J to jump that to its own layer. Command T to do a transform, and we do the same thing all over again. I'm going to rotate it like this. I'm going to pull it over here. I'm going to distort it by making it a little more narrow. I'm going to say okay to that. Hold down my Option key, click on Add a Black Layer Mask. Hit the B key to get a brush. White is my foreground color, making it a little bit smaller in order to paint in the reveal right there. I like this part better, but I want to carry it all the way through to the top edge of my image so it doesn't look like hair started in the middle of nowhere. I like this. Command E to merge that down, and I'm done. And it's just this over and over and over and over, and it just becomes that fast. It took me 45 minutes to show you guys how to do that. It takes me 45 seconds to do the whole thing. Questions? Okay, we've got our new version, and we will actually now have time. I would save your work at this point. Again, this is going to be your homework, so I'm going to come up to the File menu, down to Save As, because I'm going to put mine in a different place. I'm going to put mine in my TOS folder. And make sure it's a Photoshop file or a TIFF file. You do want to embed your color profile. Go ahead and hit Save. And then immediately everybody needs to go to their History panel and scroll up to the top. Do you have a state of history at the very top that's got a timestamp on it right here? No, none of you do, because every time I fucking tell you people about setting this shit up, everybody goes, yeah, I'll watch the video and do it later. And then you don't watch the video, so your preferences are not set up correctly. This is the savior of all time. Because you have 50 history states. When you hit state number 51, it's gone for you. You can never get it back. If you have timestamps like this, even though you're doing work as you go along, when you realize after 8 hours of retouching that somewhere along the line you fucked up, you start to go into these history states back one at a time to find the place where you fucked up. And if you're lucky, it wasn't at the beginning of your editing session, it was an hour ago, or it was 2 hours ago, so you only lose an hour of work or 2 hours of work. This is production level shit, and you people need to start focusing on this shit that I tell you to do and just saying, when I say you need your icons to be really big so you can see what the fuck is going on, and nobody does it, it drives me nuts. Can you tell I'm getting a little angry? So to fix this, go to your history palette, straight across from the tab, there are the little 3 menu arrow lines, whatever. Somebody calls this a hamburger. I don't. Anyway, click on that. You'll get a drop-down menu. Come down to History Options. You need to select Automatically Create Snapshot. First one is on by default. However, Automatically Create New Snapshot when saving is the one you want to turn on right now, because that's the one that will give you time-stamped history states. And there is no limit to the time-stamped states. There is to your actual history states, but not these, until you close your file, and then you lose all of your history. But as long as your file is open, you will have these. You also then want to click on Show New Snapshot Dialog by default. However, Photoshop broke this. So even though you were going to click on it, it doesn't work. But hopefully Photoshop is going to fix this, and it will. So then say OK to that. So now save your work. Again, File menu down to Save. You can do a Save As. I've already saved mine, so I'm just going to do it as a repeat because we haven't made any change. But I'm going to hit Save again, and I'm going to go ahead and replace the one that I just did to make sure that your history states are now working. And you'll see I now have 2 of them. I've got one that was done at 246 and another one that's done at 248. You need to be in the habit of having these states, and you need to be in the habit of saving every 10-15 minutes. Did everybody set the Save Your History fuck up thing in the preferences? Let's check. Up to the Photoshop file, if you're doing Windows, it's the Edit menu down to Preferences, and Photoshop file, it's up Photoshop down to Preferences, unless you're on the new versions of Mac OS, in which case this says Settings instead. And then you want to come over to, I think it's Workspace. We'll see. Nope. I don't remember where this is. I just know you need to find it. Yes, file handling. In file handling, if you click, so again, preferences or settings, either in the drop-down menu under Photoshop or in the edit menu in Windows, you'll get this up. File handling is the preferences that we want to set. Automatically save recovery information every, that should be checked, and in the drop-down menu every 10 minutes. So if all of a sudden some catastrophic failure happens on your computer, you will not have, you will be able to recover this last 10 minutes. You will only have lost 10 minutes of your work. Go ahead and say OK to that. So now we're ready to start working on the blue. And I'm hoping I can do this in 10 minutes and we will take a break. I'm going to double click on the hand. I'm going to come over now and I'm going to actually again decide which channel is giving me the best separation between her hair and the background. So we decided that it was the blue channel. So in my channels palette now, I've selected the blue channel, and I'm now going to drag it down on top of the little square at the bottom of that that's got a square with a plus in the middle of it, which makes a copy of that blue channel. And I'm going to double click on the name, and I'm going to rename it Knockout Blue Background. Don't say Knockout Blue, because blue is a channel. You want to make sure you're labeling this to say this is about the blue background of my image. You also don't want to just call this background, because you can confuse the word background here with the first layer of every Photoshop file in existence, because they're all named background. So again, this is going to be Knockout, K-N-O-C-K. You don't have to do the whole thing. Knock Blue Background, Blue B-A-C-K-G-R-U-N-D. All right, so this is how we're going to start to work on this part now. I'm going to go away from my tablet. I don't need it right now. So I need everybody to zoom into this curl, the really dominant curl. So if you think of her head as a clock face, this curl is right at 3 o'clock. It's the biggest one. It's sticking out the farthest. And we need to dissect this curl right here. This is one of the best examples that I can give you about where you put your sample points and what you're really looking for. So if we take a look at the hair that's on the outside of the curl, so again, we'll imagine this curl is a clock face as well. If I'm looking at this stuff right around 5 o'clock, you can see there's a hole in that hair right there. And it's also really thin. It's not like hair on top of hair on top of hair, whatever. It's actually transparent. It should have some transparency in it. So I don't want this in my mask. I want it to be dark, but I do not want it to be black. If I make this part black, my mask is too aggressive. I do not want that. So instead, I'm going to look at the hair that's on the part that's on this area. Take a look at my screen when I'm talking about this area that's coming right down here. And you can see it's a very solid hunk of hair. And so I can use this part to actually lay down my sample point. But you can also see, I'm going to zoom in on this just so everybody can see this part. You can also see there's an area down here underneath it where her hair is really dark. If I put my sample point there, again, I'm hovering over it right now. You can see in my readout at the top, I'm getting a 31, 31, 31. So it's basically, it's not black. It's dark, but it's not black. But then look at the area right above it. So the area that's right sort of in that middle of that lock of hair, and I'm getting there of 55, 55, 50. It's lighter. So the trick is if I put my sample point here where it's black and I make it black, the area that is above it, that is that lighter, already gray, will not be black. It will not be a complete part of my mask. That's a problem. This is not transparent. This should be black. However, if I put my color sampler point here and I get that to go black, the area that already is black will already be black. Does that make sense, everybody, what I'm talking about here? So you can see this in real time. Come over to your eyedropper tool and come down to the color sampler tool. And I'm going to put 1 point on the top right here in that area that is gray. I'm going to click on it right there. And then I'm going to do another point right down underneath it where it's black. So I'm picking two hunks of hair just so that you can see what it is I'm talking about. Everybody got their points down? Okay. So over to your info palette, we need to change these to give us RGB readouts. So I'm going to click on eyedropper number 1 in my info palette and change it to RGB color. I'm going to click over to the number 2 and I do the same thing. I want my readouts to be in RGB, and you can see that the one that's on the top edge right here is the one that's sort of in the middle. The lighter one is reading in the mid 50s, and then the one on the darker area is reading in the mid 20s. I'm going to hit Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And I'm going to slide this out of the way. And now if I grab this my shadow point slider underneath the histogram on the left-hand side, and I start to click and drag to the right, the whole time I'm watching these readouts on the side here. So I'm going to watch my number 2 readout because it is the darker of the readouts. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it over. I'm going to get close to 0, but I'm stopping. I'm at a 3 right now. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap that in till I just get to 1. So you can see now that darker point is actually black, but look at the lighter point that's in the middle. It's not black. It's reading in the mid-30s. It should be black. Making sense? So I'm going to continue to drag this over now until I see the point number 1 get close to 0. Stop. It's at the 3s right now on mine. Go to my arrow keys. Tap that in. When it finally gets to 0, the area that was black originally is still at black. So the point that I'm trying to make to you is that where you put these points down matter. It isn't just about, you need to give yourself the correct information. Yes? It's right here. Oh, did you say, how did I get it to come up? I hit Command L. If you can't remember that, it's up at the image menu, down to adjustments, and you'll have levels right there. So is this making sense, everybody, why I picked that point? Right? You need to pick if you're hoping it to be black, you need to pick the lightest tone that you know you want to be black. Because all the ones that are darker for it they'll get to that black before the point that is the lightest that you need to be black in your mask gets there. We good on this part? Yes. That's why we're going over it, and again right now, and we will go over it again and again and again. This is the art of doing this kind of work right now, is knowing where to pick the points. right? And then, but I'm going to show you a couple of other tricks to think about in terms of just looking at our mask before we say okay. Because there's sometimes where I will pick this and I think I've got all the right points, but then I can take a look at the overall mask and I'll say, oh my God, that's just too aggressive. That's just way too aggressive. I need to start to back off on this. So we're not there yet, but we're close. When did it come up? Okay. So before we change this levels point, we can actually move stuff around. So I don't need this point number 2 to be on the hair. I was just showing you this as a mistake. Does that make sense, everyone? It was not the point that you wanted. But if you hover your cursor now over the point number 2 and hold down your shift key, it will actually give you the tool, the point tool. You can now move this point, and I'm going to click and I'm going to simply drag it out of my background so it becomes my background point. I don't need it anymore to do what I'm looking for, but I do need now a point that's in my background because I got to get my background to white. So remember, when we're doing this, you want your 2 points. I've got one on the hair in the correct spot. I've got one on the background now, and you want it to be kind of close to, I don't want to put it, I've got background all over. I've got background on the complete other side of the image. I don't want to put it over there. I need them to be kind of close to one another for this to actually work. Did that work for everyone? Could you move your point? All right, so now I need to set the white point. So again, my point number 2 right here, I'm reading 190s. That's where I'm at. Again, you should be close. I'm going to grab my white point slider underneath the histogram at the top and start to drag towards the middle. And again, I'm looking to get close to 255, but not quite there. So I get to I'm at a 254, stop, go to your arrow keys. And if your readout starts moving in the wrong direction, it's just because you're hitting the wrong arrow key. So in this case, watch, I'll show you on mine, you can actually see, oh, I'm going down, I'm going to 244, oh, that's a 240, I'm going the wrong direction. Just go the other key. So it's either the up or down key. And you want to do just the minimum to get you there. Then before we say okay, check your first point now, make sure that that 000 did not change. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But now to go back to the overall question about making sure that I've picked the right points. Before you say okay on this, I haven't committed to this yet. I'm gonna back off. I want to see my image. I want to see a bigger area of my image. So I can still hold down the space bar, the command key, and the option key to get the negative magnifying glass. And I'm gonna zip back out so that I'm kicking out so that I can really see this edge. To move around, simply hold down the space bar, you'll get the hand, and we can take a look around here. And what I'm looking for is I want to see a really feathery edge here. I want to feel like I've got some transparency in some of this hair right here. You can see those hairs have not gone solidly black. There's still some, this is giving me some transparency in there. Use the preview check mark in the levels dialog box to turn this on and off. And say to yourself, am I still keeping the feathery hair? I am, but look at this. I need everybody to look at my screen. This area that I'm looking at right here. This area that's right in here where I'm making the transition from a lot of messy hair to like full hair. I don't want this gone. I need to keep some of that background in there. So when I turn on my preview, I can still see stuff in here. Look up at my screen. Don't do this, but look up at my screen. If my mask is too aggressive, watch what's happening to this. I'm going to overdrive my black right now. So watch this area right in here. As I start to crank this up, all of that is going away. That's all background that's supposed to be coming through that hair, and I just butchered it. The flip side, that was at a 62. I just remembered where it was. So the flip side of this is that you can get too aggressive with the white point. Watch what happens to all this really fine feathery hair when I do this. You don't want to do that either. So if you back off and you look at this and say, well, I set the points correctly, God damn it, Verser told me that this is where I was supposed to set it, but you see that, you know you've overdriven this. This is not going to make a pretty mask. This is just going to butcher all that hair. It's all going to go, right? So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that to bring it back to where it was. Are there questions about this part? This is the art of all of this. Are we good on this part? So then, I'm feeling good enough about this, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that part. But then I've got problems with this mask. So there are other things that I need to deal with. I'm going to zip back out and take a look at everything else that's going on in here. So hold down the space bar and the Command key, and that will give you the magnifying glass no matter what tool you have selected. If you add the Option key, it becomes a minus. Good? Okay. This would be a great time for a break. I know, right? But I'm going to be crazy about this because this is how little time we have today. I have 3:02. You need to be back at 3:12. A hard 10. Okay, back into Photoshop. So now we basically got the beginnings of our mask part are made. There's problems that we've got with this in the background. Again, I've got issues around her fingers. I've got issues around her shoulder. Those things are causing me problems right now. But at least the part around this blue part that I feel like was the most, I've actually got pretty clean here. However, you need to check this because yours should, so does it look like your background is all white now? Yeah, it does, right? Take your cursor and hover over the top right-hand corner and look up at your info palette and tell me what you read on that readout up there in that top corner. I got a 245. You have a 247. Is that white? No. That is contamination that you will have in your image. So we need to fix this part. If we hover over the area that's right next to the edge of her hair, I got a 249. That's also a problem. That's not white. So we are going to zoom into this area. I am going to use my trackpad for my tablet for this. If you've got it, you're welcome to. If not, again, this is not where the tablet thing is critical, but this is just how I work. I'm going to hit the B key to actually get a brush. Make sure that you're working on your knockout blue background to do this. And now, I need you to watch this trick here because I'm going to show you how I'm going to do this. Just watch the way that I ultimately do this. One of the problems that I have here again is that I need to get my brush so I can work in this area over in here. But the minute I do that, my cursor, I go outside of my image and I lose the brush and it becomes the cursor again. So I need to get to the pasteboard. This is where we were at when we were doing the work with the pen tool. So you need to hit the F key once. This puts you on the pasteboard. Now if you hold down your space bar, you get the hand, you can actually move this. So now I've got a brush that I can work outside of this thing. So I can do really detailed, tight work in here, which is what I'm looking to do. I'm going to make my brush, again, I got the B key to make sure that that is selected. I'm going to make this a medium hard brush, 50% hard. That'll work well for me. I'm going to have white as my foreground color. So if black is your foreground color, hit your X key to make it white as your foreground color. I'm going to make the brush a little bit larger. The bracket keys. And then I'm going to come in close to this area right in here. You can see if I hover over this, I'm getting a 246, 248 up in my background part in here. I know that I've got a problem right here. You are never going to get this to be 100% perfect. What I want to do is pull a little bit of this stuff out and leave a little bit behind. We're splitting hairs here. No, that is such a bad pun for this, right? Okay. If I do watch my screen here, don't do this, but if I watch my screen like here, if I click and do this right away, it just kills that little fine hair. That's not what I wanted to do. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to change my brush blending mode from normal down to overlay because this, again, respects contrast. So even though I've got it set to overlay and it is white, if I come over here an area that is black on the image and start to paint, nothing happens because I'm in overlay blend mode. If I was in normal blend mode and I did that, it would paint white in here, and that's not what I want to do. So again, the overlay brush is like giving me training wheels for this thing. It's like helping protect that stuff. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to go back to overlay for my brush. Make sure it is still a 50% hardness brush. Make it a little bit larger right now. And now watch what I do right here. I'm going to click and drag away from the hair. So I'm going to click here and pull back. Now that also killed too much of that space back in there. I killed too much of that hair. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. And now instead, I'm going to drop my opacity down to 50% and do the same trick again. And now you can see it left behind most of that hair. The hair got a little bit fainter, but not too bad. I'm going to work my way all the way down this image in this part like this. I'm just clicking and pulling away. I lose only a fraction of hair. There's white background that's inside of here that I'm never going to completely get out to white. That's not my goal. My goal is to just build my border out here a little bit more. And so now when I hover over this, I've got a 255. That's perfect. So now I can take my opacity all the way back up to 100% again. I can take my overlay blending mode back to normal, and I can make sure that I've got a 100% hard brush, because now I just want to clean out the area that's in this top right hand corner. So I don't want to be, I'm scared that if I get close to any of this hair, that having a soft brush, I will actually overspray into that. If I've got a hard brush, I don't need to worry about that. And I'm just gonna, look, you can even see on the screen right there, look at the difference in this really light 245 tone right here and that really dark shit right there. That makes me nervous because you will spot that. So I'm gonna go back to, and actually I did that with dissolve as my blending mode, so I don't want that. Hang on one second. Yeah, let me go back to a true normal blending mode, but nonetheless, it's gonna be the same thing. I can still see that edge right there. I'm gonna go back to my 50% hardness brush. And then I'm just going to work down here along all of that and get rid of all of that stuff. And I'm gonna continue to work my way down here. And then by the time you get down to where near the area we were with our second, I've got 255s all in there. I'm coming all the way down here. I'm getting close to her shoulder. That's all been cleaned out, 255. I'm gonna go look at the background on the other side, and on the other side, that got all cleaned out. That's all 255. So this part's actually worked out really well for me. So now I've cleaned all of this part up. Are we good on this part so far? At this point, it'd be a really good idea to save your work again. So just come up and hit save. You already have saved it to a place. If you then click on your scroll to the very top of your history palette, you will see that we've got another history state time stamped now at 320. Mine says right here, yeah, 320 something. If at this point I realized I had a problem, I could go back to my 248 timestamp and see if the problem is gone. First off, I would go back in history. I'd go all the way back. But if it didn't get, so problem, what do I mean by problem? What happens if one of your layers is actually moved? You moved it by mistake. One of your masks is actually moved. You moved it by mistake. It was a mistake you made, and it's no longer in register. Does that make sense? That can happen. And so instead of saying, well, I've lost my 50 history states and I'm just going to start over again, you go back in these history states, the time stamps. You hope you find it happening relatively quickly and not something that happened way too deep back and that you've got so much more work to do. But again, if you do an 8-hour session, you don't save any work and you lose 8 hours, you're an idiot. And I know nobody in this room is an idiot. Then you're just being, I don't know. You're not thinking. All right. So that part's cleaned out. But now I need to actually do other work. So I'm going to start off with her shoulder because that's a problem we've got. Jordan, I think you're the one who brought up that was one of the challenges you had was the shoulder part. Okay, so we're going to go after the shoulder right now to see if we can't fix that part. So for me, when I look at this, I'm going to go back to my channels. I'm just going to start off with my channels again. I'm going to click on the red channel again, and you can see that in the red channel, you've actually got pretty good separation between the sweater and the background. If I go to the green channel, that's horrible. They're almost exactly the same. And if I go to the blue channel, well, this is where I started. I started with a copy of the blue channel, and this is the problem right here. They're so close to each other, I get no separation at all. However, I do have separation in the red channel, so I'm going to do this whole process over again just to give me the edge of where the sweater meets the background on this shoulder. So instead of explaining this, I want everybody to follow these steps with me, and hopefully this will become apparent what I'm actually doing. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do, so did everybody see right off the bat though that the best separation for this edge is the red channel? Right? Again, look at your green channel right here. That sucks. And look at the blue channel. And that's even worse. So I'm going to grab the red channel and I'm going to copy it. I'm going to drag the red channel down. I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to double click on that red copy and I'm going to rename it temporary right shoulder. And say okay. Then I'm going to do the same trick we've been doing all along. I'm going to go after my eyedropper tool, the color sampler tool, not the eyedropper tool. I'm going to zoom into this area of her sweater right now, and this is the same problem. Again, I'm looking at the first of the sort of the camel humps that's right next to her hand. You can see that on the right side of that hump is lighter than the left side of the hump. Again, I want the hump, I want the sweater to be white and the background to be black. That's my goal. If I make this area that's on the right side, I take that back. Yeah, if I make it, take it back. If I make this area that's already darker, if I make that black, the area that was lighter will still have some tone in it. This is exactly the trick when we were looking for, do we do the lighter part of the hair or the black part of the hair? This is the same thing, it's just in reverse. So if I get this part of the sweater right in here to go black, this part of the sweater over here will not be black. If I get this part of the sweater over here black, then the part that's already darker will be black. Who does not get this? Don't be ashamed to raise your hand and just say, Versa, that you're losing me here. All right, so I'm going to put down a spot right here on the lighter part of the sweater. And then you can see there's a fuzzy element on the sweater. I want to make sure I keep all of that. That is the true way. The reason we make, these are called luminosity masks, by the way, because they're based on the luminosity. I want to keep that fuzzy part. That's the thing that you can never do with the pen tool. That's the thing you can never do with the quick selection tool, or the select subject tool, or the select object tool, or the God knows what other fucking tool they're going to come out with. It's, you know, promising you the world and giving you nothing. So I'm going to stay away from that feathery, fuzzy edge, and I'm going to just put a point up here on the top. So that's my point number 3 and 4. So again, in my info palette, I've still got the 2 original points. I'm going to completely ignore those. They don't mean anything to me right now because I've got a completely different channel. But I'm going to change my point number 3 to give me an RGB readout, my point number 4 to give me an RGB readout. And then the same thing we have been doing all along. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. I'm going to start with the black part, the white part first. So I'm going to start with my white slider because I want to get this sweater to actually go. Oh, actually, I did this completely wrong. I'm going to cancel out of that right now. I'm working in the completely different way. I want the sweater to be white. So if I've picked the lighter of the tones for the sweater, when it gets to be white, the darker area will not be. So I need to move that point over to the darker part. When I get this darker part to white, the lighter part will already be there. Does that make sense, everyone? We good on this? Yeah, that's the first mistake I've made in the last 6 years. No, I'm just kidding. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. Okay, so I'm going to do with the white point first. So I'm going to click on this, the white point underneath the histogram. I'm going to start to draw towards the middle, and now I'm actually watching my point number 3 right here. I'm watching those readouts. I'm going to get close to 255, and then I'm going to back it off a little bit and stop. I'm going to go to my arrow keys and tap up, or in this case down, till it reaches 255. So this is now correct. I'm reading 255 for that darker part of the sweater. Again, the lighter part of the sweater has already gone dark. So then I'm going to grab my shadow slider, the darker one on the left side underneath the histogram, and start to pull it towards the center. And I'm looking at my number 4 readout right here. And again, I'm trying to get it to get close to 0. I'm going to back it off when it does hit 0. So I'm like at a 2 right now. I'm going to go to my arrow keys. Then I need to revisit the white point. And you can see the white point that was at 255 is now gone to 254 because of the shadow adjustment that I made. So I'm going to select my white point slider again, and then just use the arrow keys to tap that in until I get 255. That just boosted up my number 4 point, so now I've got a 1 there. So I'm going to select that dark point again, and then use the up and down arrow keys to get myself to 0. So again, I've got 255 for my sweater and 0 for my background. Now at this stage of the game, you only need to worry about this edge. That's the only thing I'm looking at. And you can see all the fuzzy part of the edge. Guys, that is gold. That is how you get paid millions of dollars as a retoucher, because you managed to keep this. This is what makes the sweater not look like you went in with an X-Acto knife and cut the fucker out. This is what makes it look like a real, true, organic selection. I want to keep all of that part. So this looks good to me. Again, before you hit OK, use your preview check mark to turn it on and off. Are we keeping the part that we want to keep? Yes, I am. I'm feeling good about it. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. However, I have contamination in both the sweater and in the background. If you look at the sweater right down in here, you can see there's some areas down on the sweater part, not this beautiful edge that I've got, but down on the sweater part a little bit lower that tend to be a little bit too dark. And then if you look up in the background, you can see it looks like little bits of snow that are up in this background part in here. Do you guys all have that? We need to fix that. That's contamination. So again, the B key to get a brush, make it a smaller brush. I'm going to make this a relatively hard brush. I want really good control on this. I don't want a hard edge, but I want pretty good control. So I'm going to go up to an 85% hardness on mine. I am going to keep my opacity 100%, my flow at 100%, but I am definitely going to change this to an overlay brush to try to protect those edges. White is my foreground color, so watch my screen. Watch what I do right here. This is the only problem area I see is right in here, and it's right in this part right here as well. I'm going to hide those little points just for a second so you can see. So I'm going to click on here to click and drag that part out, and then I'm going to click on here and drag that part out, and that's all I need to do for the sweater. I'm going to hit the X key to make black my foreground color, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click and pull away without getting all of that fine hair gone, but I need to get rid of all of those stupid little pieces of snow that are in the background. Now, I'm only concerned about the edge. You do not need to go after the whole rest of your image. I'm just going to go after the edge part right here. I'm going to take a look around the rest of it. There's a couple of more little pieces of snow here. There's some right in here. Again, stay away from your edge when you're doing all of this work. And then finally, you don't need to really care about this thumb part in here. It can get a little tricky though, so I want to build up the density of the thumb part just a little bit more. Black is my foreground color. This is an overlay brush, so if you simply start to paint across this line a little bit more, it'll get rid of that. And then finally, I'm going to get rid of this part that's up in here. This is the only thing I needed to get. All I really wanted was this edge right here. Does that make sense, everybody, what's going on? Okay. So I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. Everybody feels like they've got a good, don't worry about any of the rest of the image, just that edge. Everybody feeling good about their edge? Okay, we are going to load this thing as a selection. How do I load this channel as a selection? Command click to load this as a selection. You'll see you get a bunch of marching ants. But you now need to see what these marching ants really do. Okay, again, I'm going to hit Command D. Do not hold down the Command key and click on the channel. You have to hover over the thumbnail. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click. It will load that as a selection. It has loaded the luminosity, and what that means is that wherever it is black has not been selected at all. Wherever it is white, it is completely selected. Wherever it's a middle gray, it's half selected. Whenever it's a darker gray, it's less selected. Where it's a lighter gray, it's more selected. This will now control actually how you can paint using this selection. To see what that means, I want everybody over to their layers menu, and I want you to add a blank new layer menu on top of this, and I want you to turn off both the eyeballs. You've just got a selection going. Remember, this area right here on the shoulder is white. The area in my selection, the area above it is black. So then I'm going to take a brush, the B key, I'm going to make it a normal brush. I'm only showing you what selections do. We're going to throw all this away. This is a temporary thing. I'm going to make my brush larger. I'm going to hide all, I can't hide those guys, I'll hide the selection too. And then I'm just going to paint right over this edge that we were just talking about. So simply, again, I'm painting with black on an empty layer with a selection going. a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, and just start to paint over this area right in here. And you can see now, if you zip in here and move into here, that the selection is controlling where you can put ink down. Where it was white in the mask is fully selected, so where we are now painting that white area, it's taking all of the ink. But the area of the background that we turned black is not selected at all because of our selection. It was black. So when you load a selection, selections and masks are interchangeable from one another. Does this make sense to everybody what's going on here? Try this. We're going to zip back out. Go over to her face and just paint around her eyes in here. You can see the luminosity of my mask is actually controlling where I can actually lay this paint down. So in the areas where it's actually laying down quite a bit of dark color here, it's because that in my mask was white when I launched this selection. I know this is a lot. As we continue to work with this every week, this will become second nature to you. Are we good on this part? All right, hit Command D to deselect. You can throw that layer away. We're simply going to use it now. So I'm going to come over. I'm going to select in my channel my knockout blue background to make it active. So this is what I've been working on. This is where I went in and I actually did my layers on this thing. My levels on this thing. This is where I actually painted to clean out that corner. I've done all the work on this so far. Are we good about this part? So now I just need to actually build that shoulder, and I need the shoulder. I need all of that to be black. The only thing I want white in this mask is the blue background. So a lot of times to help reinforce that, I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make black as my foreground color. I'm going to make this a completely hard brush because the work that we're doing now should be controlled by selections. You shouldn't have to worry about whether your brush is hard or soft because you are not free painting right now. You're actually using a selection and then you're just painting inside those lines. So right off the bat, it's a hard one. I know that her eyes and that this part of her hands and the whole sweater need to be black. So just to help you realize what we're going for, I'm just going to start painting black. Stay away from all the edges. Don't go near any edge. But the rest of all of this, you can simply paint out totally black. Again, stay away from her fingers. I'm just giving you some idea of where we're heading in this whole game. I'm going to come down to the bottom. I can paint all this out. Take a look at my screen really quickly. You can see I've got a large area down here of the lower part of the sweater that I need to be black. Again, the whole sweater needs to be black. Yes? It's because you've still got a selection going. Hit Command D. Your selection is controlling where you can paint. And then you're probably still in overlay blend mode. But I can actually use fill commands with this. So I'm going to hit the L key to get a lasso tool. I'm going to select a big old ass of this lower part of her sweater. And then again, to fill with your foreground color, the keyboard shortcut is Option Delete. It fills it with black. Command D to deselect. You can do all of the obvious work easy. You just want to stay away from the edges. You need to use all this luminosity stuff to build your edges. Does this make sense to everyone? Okay. So now I've basically got, I've got to still clean up this, but I want to go after the shoulder now. That's the part that we were doing all of this work for. So I'm going to zoom into this shoulder slightly, but I still want you to be able to see what was really going on in here. So to do this, I'm working on the channel that is the knockout. But I can use this temporary mask to launch it as a selection to control where I actually paint. So I'm going to hover over the thumbnail of temp right shoulder, hold down hover over the thumbnail, not the channel. If you hover over the channel and click, it will select the channel. I don't want to do that. I just want to load the selection of this channel. Hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key and click. It is loading it as a selection. You can see the little marching ants right here. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush, and then I need everybody to look at my screen really quickly here. I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. because this is the last trick, and then you guys will all be good to go. I've still got a normal blending mode. I've got a very hard brush, which I want because, again, part of this finger is protected, but there's another part that's actually not. If I've got a hard brush, which I do right now, I can actually nail this edge right here. But watch my screen to see what happens. I'm going to click and then just paint along this line right here. And you can see that actually gives me that beautiful mask edge that I'm looking for. But look what happens here. When you do this, remember, you have selected the opacity of that beautiful edge. If you do more than one pass, you violate that. See how dark that edge is right now? That was one pass. If I take my cursor up off of my tablet and then I go back down and hit it a second time, it gets darker. Again, I'm adding opacity and opacity. If I hit it again, it gets darker. Again, it gets darker. Every time you hit it, you get further away from the selection that you originally built. The selection that you built was perfect. But when you hit it a second time, you double the impact. If you hit it a third time, you hit it 3 times, 4 times. You do not want to be scrubbing back and forth across this thing. You want to hit it once and leave it. Make sense? So I'm going to go back in history till all of that gets undone. So this is what you need to do. With that selection going, I'm going to zip back out. I need to be able to see the whole shoulder so that I can get this in one single pass. I'm going to click on it and drag all the way across to the end, and I am done. Command D to deselect. You guys can go ahead and do this right now. That has been perfectly made. That edge is beautiful. My temporary right shoulder that I spent all that time making, I'm throwing it away. It's done its job. I don't want to keep all this shit around. You're just going to get confused. Does everybody have this shoulder built now? Again, so this is the whole point that I'm making, is that you guys need to, you know how to do it once. Why not do this over and over and over again to select the bits and pieces of shit that you want to select? To build the mask that you want to build. It's the same process. Yes. Yes. No, that's all right. That's why we're taking the time. So I went back in history because it brings back my temporary shoulder. So what? So yes, that's the blue background is my destination for all of this work right now. Okay, so you got that part right. Do you have a temporary right shoulder one as well? Yeah. So do not select the temporary shoulder. Hover over the thumbnail. Okay. Hold down the command key. Again, hold down the command key. You do not, it's always the hovering over the thumbnail. It's never picking the channel unless the channel is what you want to paint on. So if I pick the channel like that, I'm back to that channel and I can continue to work on this. But I only built this to get this edge. So again, I'm going to select on the blue background, hover over the thumbnail of the temporary shoulder, hold down the command key and click. It loads it as a selection. I'm going to back off because I want to be able to see this entire edge to hit it in one stroke of paint. I hit the B key to get my brush, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color, and I'm simply going to trace along that edge line right there, and I'm done. Command D to deselect. Are you good? Mm-hmm. All right, throw away the temporary shoulder. Still with my 100% hard mask, I can actually come in here and I can do a little cleanup. So I'm just going to continue to fix and get rid of all the sweater part. I can get rid of all of that. But now I need to work out the fingers because somebody else said this was the other problem that they had was selecting the fingers from the background. I'm going to zoom into the fingers up at the top, and what you'll notice here is that you've got fingers, but you've got hair and you've got background as well. Again, I want to leave all of the background. I want it to all stay white, but I want the fingers now to be all black, right? Everything in this I want to be black except for what is blue, the blue background in this image. So I am going to keep a hard brush like I've got right now. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, but I'm going to change the blending mode from normal down to overlay. And then I'm going to come in just on these edges. So it's a relatively small brush because I don't want to accidentally paint over something else somewhere out in here. So I'm going to start at the fingers that are up here at the top. So just take a look at my screen to see what I'm going to do here, and then I'm going to let you guys do it. So I'm simply going to click on this line and start to, sorry, that's a normal blending mode brush. You need to make sure it's an overlay brush. And I'm just going to start to paint down along this. You need to go ahead and cross that line. So you can see my brush is actually partially on the white background, but because I'm in overlay blend mode, it does not lay down that ink. It finds that edge. However, it didn't find it well enough up here at the top, so I'm going to hit it again up here at the top. And then I'm going to cheat my brush to the inside. You don't want to make this thing work any harder. It's already found the very edge between the two, but I'm looking for a little more wiggle room in here so that I don't have to make my selection so, it doesn't have to be so challenging to get to. But now if you look at the finger that's actually above this right now, this finger is all surrounded either by black or what should be black. So like this skin should be black in here. So I can go back to a normal blending mode in this. Again, I'm at 100% hardness, which is important because I'm not going to accidentally spray ink out into this blue background in here and contaminate it. It'll keep me all in the line. So I'm just staying inside all of those lines. I can come down and get all of this part in here. All of this I know needs to be black. I can do the stuff in the middle right here. It's already, those edges are already black, but again, stay away from any edge here. You don't want to be doing any of that work. I can do the thumb right here. I can actually go after this part in here. So you can see there's a little bit of sweater in here. This is one of the things that'll trip you up when you're actually selecting the sweater. You need to make sure that this part of the sweater that's right in between her thumb actually shows in your sweater selection. But in our case, that's not blue background, so I want to get rid of this. How would you get rid of this? Well, you can try an overlay brush, so that's what I'll try. I'm going to grab the overlay brush, and I'm just going to start to work my way down on that, and that does a pretty good job of that part, and I'm good to go. I can also hit the skin right there, but I'm leaving that blue background part in the back. I'm going to zip in here a little bit more. There's an edge right in there that has not been gotten. So again, the overlay brush takes care of all of that. We're good to go there. And then finally, I've got this one finger that's got the fingernail and profile that I see. This is going to be a challenging one. So again, I'm going to make my brush considerably smaller. I'm just going to darken up that edge line. Again, I'm still in overlay blend mode for the brush, just to give myself a little bit more room to work in here. Don't do anything about the fingernail yet. I'm just going to get rid of the rest of this part right now. But now I've got this fingernail, and the fingernail, just that small little edge corner in here, this part is, I'm never going to get that with an overlay brush. It's already too light. I mean, her fingernails are white, so the overlay brush is never going to fix that. So I hit the P key to get the pen tool, and I actually trace this out using the pen tool. Put a little bend in it. Bring your pen tool all the way around, reconnect it. So again, all the area that you need to be black, you don't need to worry about that being part of your pen selection. It's supposed to be black. But this now describes that arc of the top of her fingernail. I'm going to go to my path palette. It's called work path right now. I want to keep this selection in case it's wrong or in case I need to use it again. So I'm simply going to double click on work path, and I'm going to rename it fingernail. And say OK. Then I can load this as a selection. Hover over the path, thumbnail, hold down the command key and click. It becomes a selection. I need to soften that just a little bit. It's too perfect a selection right now. So I'm going to go up to my select menu, down to modify, and I'm going to feather this. And I'm going to feather it such a small amount. I'm going to do a 0.2. So I'm doing it 1/5 of a pixel. And say OK. And then this area is all black. I've got a selection going. I'm still working on my blue background channel. You can simply fill this with black. Black is my foreground color, so Option Delete fills it. Command D to deselect. I've now got the perfect profile of that little thumbnail. I've still got this weird area that's in the middle that needs to be covered, that needs to be black. It's part of her finger. The B key to get the brush tool back and just fill all the rest of this in. It's still set to overlay. Change it back to a normal blending mode and finish this part. Then finally, I've got a little bit of an issue right here. It's the edge of her skin where it's actually meeting that background. But again, I've still got an overlay brush going on in here, so I'm simply going to change my, I don't have an overlay brush. I'm gonna change my blending mode of my brush down to overlay, and I'm gonna simply come down on that line to actually get rid of that. And we are close to being done. I'm gonna zip back out. I need to finish this area, but you can now see all of this area of her face in here. It's all surrounded by black. So again, with a brush, the B key, and a little bit larger brush, change it back to your normal blending mode. Make sure that it is a completely hard brush. Mine is. So that way I don't worry about any overspray. Make it a little bit larger. I'm simply going to paint down all of this. Stay away from the edges. That part's done. And then I've got a couple things that I need to deal with in the hair. So you'll see there's some highlights in the hair right in here. All of these need to be black. These are highlights. This is not background. So again, I've got a normal blending mode on my brush. All of this gets killed. This is all contamination in your mask. Be careful when you get down near the edges down in here. Not all of this is necessarily highlights on her hair. Some of that could actually be background. To make sure it isn't, I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to click on my RGB image when I turn back on both of my figures. And I'm looking in this area right in here on my mask, and yes, indeed, those are all little highlights in here. So I can get rid of all of those. Not the stuff that's down on the edge. I don't want to get rid of that. However, I do have her fingers, but her fingers are surrounded by black, so I can continue just to knock the rest of those out. And then finally, I've got a good neck, and I've got a good sleeve, the back of where this is part of the sweater going along the back. What I don't have is this edge right here where you can see the sweater on this background. I don't want to try and do that using a normal blending mode on my brush. So I'm going to change my blending mode to overlay from normal and simply hit that area. Again, don't make Photoshop work any harder than it has to. And then back to a normal brush to finish working in the whole rest of that area. Double click on the hand and see how we're doing. And I'm looking pretty damn good. I've got highlights on her hair on the other side. So on the other side, you need to know what is highlight and what is background. Most of this seems like it's highlights, but as you start to get closer to this edge, you need to make sure that indeed none of that is background, because if it is background, you don't want to paint it out. So again, I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to turn on my RGB version and look at this. And I can see there's one spot right here. Everybody take a look at my screen. There's one spot right here. That's background. I don't want to paint that out. This spot right here is background. I don't want to paint that out. This is background. I don't want to paint that out. So those three spots I need to worry about. I'm going to go back and turn on my blue background. You can see one of them was that spot right there. One of them was that one right there. And one of them is this one down here. Everything else can go. So the B key, normal blending mode, 100% opacity. Get rid of this, get rid of that. I'm not really sure about this one down here, so I'm going to check that one in a minute. I can get rid of that. I can get rid of that. I can get rid of this, and this, and that. Good. That edge is still pretty clean to me. So now I need to go back in and look to make sure what of this is background and what of this isn't. So I'm going to revisit my image. That area where that really light spot is background. Actually, all of this looks like it's pretty much got background in it. Yeah, it does. So I'm going to leave that all out. This thing right in the middle is not, and neither is that. Everything else is background. Guys, as crazy and anal as this all might seem, all of this is what makes you, instead of you being $9.50 an hour retoucher, this takes you into the $3,000 a day retoucher, and you don't look back. Double click on the hand and save your work. Yes. History. You need to go back in history far enough to undo it. And other than that, Other than that, no, because it's a great question. Other than that, if you, let's say you did it an hour ago and you've spent hours and hours and hours doing this, you could always go back in and clone stamp right over the hair that was the, put hair over the background, just like we did when we put hair over the skin. So turn it into, remove it from being background and make it hair. Does that make sense? Well, you can go in to erase the mask. Yeah, you can paint white on the mask and it will actually take it away. But yeah, the point that I'm trying to make in this is that you need to always be thinking, okay, this is a horrible phrase. I don't know where it comes from. But where I grew up, there was a saying that was, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I don't know who skins cats, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you can either go back and fix it, or you can make it so that it isn't a problem. Does that make sense? So let's say that I did just cover an area here. Let's say that I did this part here. Hopefully this will make sense. So let's say when we're looking at this, that somehow I screwed this up and I painted over this with my mask, and I can't bring it back. I can't unpaint this. I can't unscrew it up, right? So then on my new version, I'm just going to hit the S key to come in for the clone stamp tool, make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to actually take a source right here, and I'm just going to make that hair. And I don't need to worry that the mask isn't showing the background now, because it's not background anymore. It's hair. That's what I'm trying to say. Make sense? All right. It was not a mistake, but anyway. Okay, so cursor, let's see how well we did. Okay. So I've got a new version right here. It is a version, so I don't want to do anything to it. Neither do I want to do anything to the one that's underneath it. This guy, I need to make a copy of it. So with NV selected, Command J will make a copy of it. I'm going to double click on the name NV copy, and I'm going to name it blue background. Do not name it background, because that's the same name as your first layer. So it is blue background. And let's find out how well we did. In order to do that, I actually need to have something underneath this, because if I put a mask on this, but what's underneath it is exactly the same, you don't get to see what the mask really does. So I'm just going to put white in between my new version and the blue background. So click on the new version, the NV1. Come down to your adjustment layers at the bottom, the icon at the bottom of your layers palette that's a circle that's half black and half white. Click on it. At the very top, you can add a solid color. It always picks the color of your foreground color. That's what it loads when it opens up. But you can still have the eyedropper tool. If you just hover over the background color, you'll get the eyedropper tool, and you can click on it, which will make it white, and say OK. And then we're going to simply add the layer mask that we just built to the blue background layer. So over to your channel, make sure it's active. Over to your channel. Hover over the thumbnail. Do not select. If you select the channel, you get this. That is not going to help you. You need to actually hover over the thumbnail, hold down the Command key, and click. That will add this as a layer mask, as a selection. Come over to your blue background, and we are going to add it as a layer mask by clicking on the icon that's the circle. And you can see this is now hiding everything except for my blue background, and this is correct. Yes? Yeah, the solid color adjustment layer. Okay, let me get rid of this mask first. And get rid of that. Okay, so I need something in between the two. So here's the trick. Let me show you this first. If I load this, I'm going to load my mask as a selection. So I'm going to click on it. This is, again, my blue background mask. It will create a mask that shows the blue and hides the figure. And then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to apply it. No, watch my screen. Watch my screen. I'm going to apply it to this top layer. So I'm going to apply it. But you don't see anything, because what's underneath it is exactly the same thing. I can turn all of these off, and then you will see that it's transparent, which is fine. That might be enough. but I really want to see it against something. So I'm going to select this NV layer because you need to put it underneath the mask, the layer that's been masked. So I'm going to select this, then I'm going to add an adjustment layer, and the adjustment layer that I'm going to add is solid color. So it's the circle at the bottom of your layers palette that's half black, half white. Click on it, and then come up and pick solid color. It simply puts on a solid color layer that's already full. But in my case, because black is my foreground color, it fills this with black. So instead of using the eyedropper tool to pick something else, I'm just going to select the R value and type in 255, hit the tab key for the green, 255, tab key for the blue, 255, the tab key, that's 225, 255. So now I'm just filling it with white, and I'm going to say okay to that. And so now it's just like a white background. That's all I've got. So is everybody good on this part so far? Who have I lost? Where are you? Well, how many times have I said the second you get lost, raise your hand, Verser, stop, because now if you're an hour back, I got no hope for you. So how far? A couple of steps back. Do you have, let me ask you this. Right after the what part? Okay, how complete is your mask? That's really the issue. Well, look at it. Look at your channel. Yeah, so you haven't finished the face of the sweater. So really quickly, zoom into the face. Great, grab a brush. Great, make sure it's a really hard brush. All the way. Great. Hard. Black is your foreground color. All of this should stay away from this thing that edge over here. All this is fine. Okay. Are we good on this, everyone? Whew. Don't worry, the rest goes faster, I hope. Okay. Going for number 2. Actually, for this second one, I'm going to go after the sweater. It seems to me the easiest one to get. I'm going to avoid other problems right now. I'm going to hit the sweater. So that's the next one I'm going to go for. So to do that, I'm going to make a copy of my new version first. I want to start with a fresh copy so that I've got all the information that I need to actually just get this mask. That's all I'm going to do. So click on NV to make a copy. Command J will make a copy of it. I'm going to double click on that and I'm going to call it sweater. No. Oh, I actually hadn't done Okay. Yes. So Marcus got this red overlay on his image, and I'll show you what it looks like. I need everybody to do this with me. So let's turn on, just turn on so you can see the sweater. Turn on so we've got the sweater part, or whatever you've got. You need to be able to see the whole image. So if you come up to the very top, you can see that the RGB part is selected, but if you come down to your knockout for your blue background and turn on its eyeball, you get this red overlay. And what this red overlay is there for, this is actually referencing a very old term that happened in the printing industry called rubylith. And basically what it's showing you, it's a way that it can show you what your mask is like, but also your image at the same time. So the truth of it is, this is actually really black. So you'll see, if you actually come down to select your, go ahead and select your, the blue background part. If you hit the B key to get a brush and then come over onto your mask, normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow, I'm gonna make it a really big brush. And I'm just gonna paint a big stroke across this. You'll see it shows up red in this view of it. But the truth is, it's only because the eyeball of the RGB is turned on. If you turn the eyeball off, you can see that really it's black in the mask itself. But it's a way to show you both. So some people like to be able to see the underlying image when they're actually working on the mask. Remember the part where I was trying to say, okay, I don't know if this is background or not. If you've got bigger areas, you can really see it. In our case, because these things are so small, if you turn on this and you turn on the rubylith part of it and you try to go in to decide is this background or not, it's really hard to see. So that's why I never showed it to you. But that's all it is. You just turn the eyeball of the mask off. That's the only thing. It's just, it'll go off. So in your channels palette, go to your blue background knockout and uncheck the eyeball. And it's gone, right? Okay. Okay, so I've got the sweater now. I'm gonna bring that above. It's just the way I work. You don't have to do it this way, but it's just the way I work. It's a safer way of working. I'm gonna just drag it on top of my blue background, but people get confused about how this happens a lot, especially when we get into working with groups. You need to bring this up so that you see the blue line on top. That's how you know that this thing is gonna go up above it. And now my sweater is sitting above it. And now I can start to work again.
Did you do your color for a moment? 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 Did you do your
I threw that away. That was just a preview. Before, because we're getting late in the game here, did everybody get their files on the little drive, or does that need to go to someone else? And did everybody get in on the sign-in list? Okay, we're good, and it's all sitting right here. Okay, we're good. All right, so I'm going to go after the sweater part right now. So I've got the sweater turned on. I'm going to turn everything else off. I'm going to turn all the other eyeballs off because I'm actually going to use the select and mask workspace. And if you have identical layers on underneath something, you don't get to see the difference. What you end up seeing is you'll see when you're using the onion skin, everything looks the same because what's underneath it is identical. So anyway, I'm turning all of the eyeballs off. I've just got my sweater layer on. I'm going to come up to the select menu, and I'm going to come down to select and mask, and this will bring me into our select and mask workspace. Everybody good on this? And you can see if you use the drop-down view menu on the right-hand side, you want to be on the onion skin, and I want to have a 50% transparency on here. You'll see if you go all the way in one direction, you get nothing because I've turned off all my layers. If you go all the way in the other direction, you get the full figure. So the 50% right in the middle will show me what I'm looking for. Then select the top tool on the far left-hand side. The tool at the very top is the quick selection tool. It's identical to it. And then I'm going to zoom in. You can still use your keyboard shortcuts here, spacebar and command to zoom in slightly, just so I can see the whole sweater. And I'm going to start in this top corner. Remember, with the quick selection tool, you do not want it to touch the edge you want it to find. So I'm going to stay away from the edge of the sweater, but I'm going to use it to hopefully select the whole thing. So I'm going to click and start to work my way down. I'm going to go up near the wrists, but don't get too close. I'm going to come up on that part, and then finally to get the last of the sweater. You can still see I've got transparency in this lower corner down here. That's what it looks like a screen down here, so I need to get all of that part. So this is my selection, and I need to see how good a selection this part really is. I feel like I've got parts of it, but I know I'm missing something. I'm missing the part that's right between her thumb and her cheek, and I'm also missing the part that's right on the back where the sweater goes back behind her neck. Again, if you want to see what this truly looks like as a mask, go to your view, click on the drop-down menu, and come down to black on white, and this will show you the quality of your mask. And as you zoom in here, you'll see you're keeping all the beautiful, look at the wrist quality right here. You're keeping all of that feathery selection part. This part's actually beautiful. I've still got that feathery selection part up on the edge. That part's really nicely done. I got this part over here. I'm not sure what's going on in here. This is a scalloped edge right here, and I think I kind of like the transparency that's in that, but I am missing, there's part of, again, the sweater that goes in the back here, and then there's also part of the sweater that's up in here that's between her thumb. We need to find all of that. I can't see it in this view, so I'm going to go back to my onion skin, and then I'm going to zoom way into this layer right in here. It's this little part of her sweater right here. I want to see if I can get that. I'm going to make my brush much smaller, because again, you can't let it touch those edges, and I'm going to click and see if this is actually can get this guy, and you see, bam, automatically it picks the blue background as well. That is not going to work for me, so Command Z to undo that. I'm going to look at the other side over here for the little bit of the sweater that's against her neck, and I'm going to click to see if I can get that part right there. And this actually does a better job. It's not a great job, but it does a better job of getting that guy right there. So I'm feeling pretty good about this as my selection. I'm going to need to do some fine tuning in here. I'm going to zip into this area. Yeah, I'm feeling good about that. A lot of this we can refine after the fact if it's not good for us, but I'm feeling pretty good about this part right now. You remember when I told you there's two ways of doing select that we can't do in manual when we're working with luminosity masks? This is both of them right here. There's a color-aware version of this, and then there's an object-aware version of this. If you click on the object-aware version of this, you'll see, is there any change, significant change that you can spot? I don't see one. I'm going to go to the black and white version and see if I spot anything along the edges. Again, I'm really concerned about this edge up here, and I'm concerned about the other edge down there as well. I'm not picking up any problem in this. So I'm going to go back to my onion skin. And I'm going to come down here in terms of all the edge detection. I'm going to leave all of those sliders out. I'm not going to use any of that shit. I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom, and what do you want this to be? I am actually in my drop-down menu, in my output 2, if you click on that, again, your options are a new layer with a layer mask, but we've already created a new layer and named it, so I don't need a new layer with it, but I do need this as a layer mask. If you simply put new layer, it will create a new layer and then apply the mask, which is destructive. We do not do that in this class. If you start turning in files that have layers where you have applied a mask and it has removed pixels, I'm going to get angry. So again, layer mask on here will be fine. That's what I'm going to do. I'm simply going to say OK to that and click OK. So now I've actually got pretty much what I'm looking for. This part's really good, except I'm missing that part that was by her thumb. That part, I'm missing all of that, right? Remember the part of the mask that I said this is no good? I need to bring that in. That needs to be a part of this selection. So in order to do that, I'm temporarily going to turn this layer mask off. To turn your layer mask off, hover over the layer mask, hold down the Shift key, and click. It will put an X through it, which allows me to now see my image. Did this work for everyone? I'm going to zoom into this part where the sweater is showing up. And if you take a really good look at this, you will see that it's not just sweater, but it's also her thumbnail. I do not want her thumbnail. Her thumbnail's not part of the sweater. I do not want that. So again, do not use a tablet for this. Hit the P key to get the pen tool and simply trace this out. But again, you're trying to put a little organic shape in it. You don't want to include the thumb in here. So I'm not going to include the thumb in there. Again, put a little bend in there to make sure that you've got all of your, make it a little bit more organic. I'm going to put a little bit of weirdness into that edge. This is exactly what we did with the fingers when we were doing our assignment last week. I'm going to click and start to drag this up. I'm going to finish clicking, dragging this around. I'm going to come up to the top and complete my selection. I'm going to go to my path palette. I'm going to, again, this is now, I've saved my fingernail. This is not it. This is a brand new path called Work Path. I'm going to double click on it and call it Sweater Bit. And say OK to that. I'm going to hover over the thumbnail of Sweater Bit, hold down my Command key, click. It loads it as a selection. I'm going to do that same fraction of a softening. Up to the Select menu, down to Modify, down to Feather, and in that 0.2, not 2 pixels, that's way too much. 0.2, 0.2 of 1 pixel is what I'm feathering this thing. I'm just really trying to pull the edge of this off a little bit. Say OK, and then I'm going to go back to my layer, on my layer mask. So if you click on your layer mask, you'll actually get rid of the X. Now, this part of my layer mask, I need to be what? White or black? Exactly. I want this to show. It's part of the sweater. It needs to be white. Right now, it is black on my mask. That's why I can't see it. So working on your layer mask, make sure that the mask is what you have selected, not the figure. If you have the pixel content selected and you fill it with white, it's going to cover this whole thing with white. I don't want to do that. It's on the layer mask. White is my background color. The keyboard shortcut for filling with background color is Command Delete. So again, the key relationship between Command and Option next to your space bar. The one immediately next to the space bar, again, the one most to the right corresponds to the color tab, the color part that is in your foreground and background color. You can see your background color is right of the foreground color. That will always correspond to the key that is right next to your space bar. Then the foreground color, which is always further to the left, corresponds to the Option key, which is also further to the left from your space bar. And then you add the delete key or the backspace key if you're on Windows. Command D to deselect. I've got one other thing I need to look at really quickly, and that is the place next to her neck. I don't know that I'm really convinced. I don't think that this is that good of a selection. This looks pretty shitty to me. So instead, what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to hide the my mask. So hover over the mask, hold down the Shift key and get rid of that. And I'm going to select this with the pen tool as well. So again, P key to get the pen tool, select, and you're just trying to get all of this part that's up into here. And then you can come into the sweater. You've already got part of the sweater. Actually, for that matter, yeah. I take that back. I was going to go into her skin. I was like, because you've got that too. You can't go into her skin because we're trying to hide that part. So this is now selected the small little bit of the sweater that's on the background back there. So I'm going to go to my path palette. Again, it's another work path. I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to call it sweater bit 2. And say okay. Command click over the thumbnail to load that as a selection. Up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather. The value you put in is sticky, so I'm going to say okay to that. The 0.2. I'm going to turn on my layer mask again. In this area, again, the whole thing needs to be white on my mask. Right now, part of it is, part of it isn't. So white is my foreground color. Command delete. Command D to deselect. This is now giving me what I'm actually really looking for. Now, in a perfect world, what I would do on top of all of this is probably refine that edge slightly. I feel like I've got a little bit of blue that's showing in here. I don't really have the feathery part that's in here as well. So we can go back to what we did previously last week when we were trying to refine the edges for the castle. I can do the same thing here. Hold down the Shift, make sure that your layer mask is selected. Hold down your Shift key, come up to the Select menu and down to Select and Mask. It will bring up the Refine Mask dialog box, nothing else. You can leave this as on layers. That's how I want mine because I don't have anything else showing. And then I'm going to grab the Refine Radius tool. So again, I need to refine this edge. I'm going to make the tool much smaller, and then I'm simply going to paint over this and see if I like what it did better. And that becomes more organic to me, so I'm going to keep that. And I'm just going to say, okay, and save your work. Okay. Is everybody good on this part so far? All right. Believe it or not, we are getting close to the finish line. Yes. You're worried about that fucking solid color layer, aren't you? Throw that mother away. a good selection to begin with. Okay, so we've got the sweater, we got the background. The next one I'm going to go after is the skin. So again, I'm going to come over to my image. I'm going to turn everybody else back on. I'm going to click on my new version again down at the very bottom. I'm going to jump this to another copy, Command J to jump it to its own. I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to rename this skin. And then I'm going to pull this thing all the way up to the top. And now we need to go after the skin. So when I said the skin, guys, I'm including fingernails in this. I'm including her teeth and her eyes. You didn't need to, and her eyebrows. I mean, you didn't need to worry about being that crazy about this. So, for what it's worth. So again, I am going to use the Select and Mask workspace to see if I can get this. It does a better job of this edge than anything I've ever seen. So that's how I'm going to go after this. So up to the Select menu, down to Select and Mask. Oh wait, hang on. Turn off everything else underneath it first. Otherwise it gets too confusing. So turn off all the layers underneath it. You've only got the skin one going. The skin layer is the only one visible. Up to the Select and Mask workspace. And we're going to zoom in a little bit here. And again, quick selection tool to begin with. Make it a little bit bigger so it goes a little bit faster. Stay away from the edges. Let the tool find the edges. If it overfinds something, don't worry about it. Go after the first part first. We'll see how it does on the skin. It got that part pretty good. It's gotten some background in there. That part's okay. It doesn't get the hair on the other side. That part's okay, but it's got all of this hair that's on this edge right here. We need to get rid of this hair that's on the left-hand side. And there's also some contamination down at the bottom. All of that actually needs to go. So hold down your Option key, and you will notice, even though Photoshop makes it so small, it's impossible to see. Right now, there's a little plus in the middle of that brush. If you hold down the Option key, it becomes a minus, and then you can actually paint across. Hang on one second. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to start painting across the top of her head here, and then down along this line to see what it ultimately actually does. And I'm feeling pretty good about that part. And we'll grab all of that part. So this part's actually worked pretty good, but what's now the problem is this whole edge, the hair part right in here. So it's on both sides, although this other side, the right side actually looks pretty good to me. The left side and the top of her head do not look good to me at all. So this is where you go to the next tool down on the right-hand side, the Refine Edge tool. So now we've used the Refine Edge tool in the old version of Refine Edge, the thing that's exactly what we just did to get that part of the sweater. This one I'm actually going to use it inside here. And this one you do need to paint over the area. You're not looking for an edge anymore. You are saying, okay, I know this is where the edge is. Again, if you change your view to black and white, you can see this is what your mask is going to look like if you don't do anything. I need to paint over this edge to see, hopefully, get that algorithm that group of teenagers wrote to give me a better edge here than I've got right now. So I'm going to go back up to the onion skin, grab the Refine Edge tool, the second tool down on the top left-hand side. Don't make this thing work more than it should, so I'm going to make my tool, actually, got to get my flyout menu for my view to go away. Make my tool just slightly smaller, and then I'm going to simply start to paint down along this edge line right down here. Now, you're not going to see what really happens until you let go, but once you let go, you'll see it's starting to bring back in a little bit. Remember, I got rid of all the hair in here. I got rid of all the skin in here, so I'm really just looking for this edge along this line, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm going to come down and continue this work all the way down into the lower part where her fingers are and that kind of stuff, and I'm going to let go. And you can see now it's brought back some parts. I've got a weirdness that's happening on the hair right here. I'm also going to run it down along that side of her finger. That part didn't help me, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. This part right in here, though, I know that this part should actually be a part of my mask. I'm sort of okay with some of the things. I know that this eyebrow should be part of the mask, and also this hair down here should also, the eyebrow should not be part of it, and this part should be part of it. So then you go to your next tool down. This is just a regular brush tool. So it's a very small brush. Again, the problem with this is that I don't have anything I don't have an edge control really of this. I don't have a lot of control with this guy, but it will paint solid color in here. So if you click on this, you can see it's completely opening up the mask. I don't want that. Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to just paint through this part to bring it back into the mask. Then for this area up here where it actually did mask, I'm going to make this brush even smaller, and I'm simply going to paint the eyebrow back in. And that's really all I'm going to do on this. The rest of the work I can actually finish in Photoshop. Where I've still got a problem is this area right in here. But to be perfectly honest with you, this area right in here, I can sit here and paint this shit all day long. It'll take me an hour, or I can just go in with the pen tool and knock this mother out in 5 minutes, which is what I'm going to do. So again, in this case right here, if we take a look around, I want to run a little bit of this along the top edge of her head and just sort of see, well, that was the wrong tool, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that and go back to the Refine Edge tool and do that up there. And that just made things worse in my book, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to hit that one small area right there. Yeah, I'm going to go with this. Okay, so again, in your output here, mine ended up going to selection. I don't want to go to a selection. I want to go to a layer mask. And so I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So this puts it on, and you can see it does a fairly good job of it. It's a little janky over here in this area over in here a little bit. I can see a little bit of those edges, but I can continue to work on this mask. So I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to zoom into the top part of her forehead, right up in this area right in here. I'm just going to get rid of one of that little piece of that doesn't belong in there. So much smaller brush. Again, I want to hide this. It's showing the skin. I want to hide it. That means I'm going to be painting with black. I'm going to change the edge of my brush. I don't want it to be 100% because it's just too solid. I'm going to change it to around an 80% so that I can go and just feather this part in and hit the X key to make white my foreground color. And I'm simply going to bring this part back in. There's also a small part down in here that I can also take care of that. I got rid of that. There's a part of her skin here that I believe really should be skin more showing. So I'm going to go to a completely soft brush. I'm going to change my blending mode to overlay. And again, I want this area to be showing. So white is my foreground color. That's what I want. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. But now I'm going to change my flow. I'm going to drop my flow down so that this is not an all or nothing thing. I'm going to put my flow down to like a 3 or 4%. And then I'm simply going to click and drag and click and drag. And I'm not really getting enough in here. It's not happening fast enough for me. So I'm going to bump my flow up to like a 15% and click and drag and click and drag. And you can see now I'm scrubbing over here. I'm just trying to feather that edge a little bit. I mean, it's not going to give me a lot, but it'll give me a little bit. Then I'm going to do the same thing up in the top of her head, up in here. I'm going to hit the X key to bring a little of that hair back in down here. And I'm feeling okay about that. I'm going to crank my flow all the way back up again. In this case, I can run it along here, but that actually makes the edge too sharp. So I'm going to Command Z to undo that. I'm going to leave that soft like it is. But then I need to go after all of this that's where all of the hair and all of the stuff that's not her skin. So the P key to get the pen tool, and you guys know how to do this. Take your time and just start going through to get the hair part. Not the hair part, the skin part selected. And get the part that's right underneath. And again, I would leave the fingernails part of the skin. And again, make sure you are running up along the cheek and not grabbing so the blue part's not in there. So I've got mine selected. That's how long it took. It would take you forever to do this. using the quick selection, refine, edges, all that kind of stuff. Again, this is yet another work path, so I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call this, what are we going to call this, guys? A skin mistake. And say OK to that. Command click to load it as a selection, up to the select menu, down to modify, down to feather, still that same 0.2 pixels to feather it. Then go back to your layers palette, make sure that you've selected the skin mask, and do I want to fill this with black or with white? What is this? Is this supposed to be showing or not? It's supposed to be not showing. This is hair, background, sweater. It's supposed to not be showing. On your mask, fill this with black. Black is my foreground color. Option delete. Command D to deselect. Save your work. So once you save your work, if you go to the top of your history palette now, you'll see there's a whole series of timestamps. Is this now dawning on you the advantage of having this? If I fucked something up a half hour ago, I don't have to start my whole project from scratch. I only need to go back to where I found that happened. We good on this part? Okay, so now if you double click on the hand, you could say to yourself, okay, well, that part actually works out, reasonably well. I mean, I think it works out pretty well. It's really hard to say. I can't really super tell here, but we'll find out. So the last thing I need to do is the hair. However, I've selected all the other pieces, and I want to base the hair on all the other selections, all the other work that I've done. Why would I do this twice? I wouldn't. So to get the last part of the puzzle, I'm going to go ahead and turn everybody back on. We're going to click, and we're going to make one more new version here. So again, I've selected the new version down at the bottom. Everybody else is turned back on. Command J to make a new selection, a new copy of it. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to call it hair. Yeah. Yes. So in all likelihood, you can do it using the mask that you already have of it. So if you look at your blue background, you've got it sitting back there. So command click on the mask. Blue background mask. Yeah, you do have stuff to go. And so this is what you need to be filled on this skin mask, and I've left you the skin mask. And it's already selected here, so now you just want to drop the mask on that. Or no, I don't want to see what it is. You're on the pixelated view of the mask. Okay, so the last part is the easiest part, but maybe the most confusing part. So we need to do one more thing. Come down to the bottom of your channels palette. So right now, I do not have any of my selections. The only selection that I've got saved is the blue knockout background. So I want to save the others. I've got them as masks, so it's very simple to do. So I'm going to hover over my sweater selection, so over the mask of my sweater layer. I'm hovering over it. Don't pick the sweater layer, just hover over the icon of it. Command click. It loads it. Come up to your select menu, come down and say save selection and call it sweater. And say OK. Command D to deselect. I need to do the same thing for her skin. Come up, hover over the thumbnail of the skin mask, hold down the Command key, click. This will load it as a selection. Up to the select menu, down to save selection, and call it skin. And say OK. Command D to deselect. Now if you go over and you look at your channels palette, you don't need to do this. I'm going to show you. I'm going to pull mine out so you can just see it a little bit better. I'm going to just move it up here and drag it out so that we can see the whole thing. So now I've got my blue background mask saved. I've got my sweater saved. I've got my skin saved. The only thing that I need left is the hair, correct? But I've got everything else selected. Everything else has been, I've got all those selections saved. So this is how you do it. It's the simplest thing in the world. You're going to create a new blank channel. So come down to the very bottom of your channel palette, click on the little plus. It's going to open up with this thing called Alpha 1. It's because these things are referred to as alpha channels, but you can rename them. And we are going to rename this one, and we are going to call it hair. It is black. If it wasn't black, I would make it black. I take it back. I'm actually going to invert this thing. I'm going to start with it white because, again, I want the hair to show. So I'm going to start with a white canvas. Realize you can do all of this work in either direction and then simply invert it at the end. I'm going to invert it at the beginning. So I'm going to invert this thing, Command I. It just inverts it. And now I've got a channel, white alpha channel. We'll start again. We'll start again. You're going to start down in the bottom of your channels palette. You're going to create your own. So click on the little box with the plus in it. This will create a new thing called Alpha 1. Double click on that Alpha 1 and call it hair. And then I want to invert this. I want to start with a white alpha channel. So just Command I inverts it. Everybody good on this part? Okay, so then I'm going to just start. I'm going to start with my blue background. Do not select it. Hover over the thumbnail. Hold down the Command key and click. This is now loaded the blue background as a selection, correct? However, I've still, what? I saved all of my selections, but you could do it off of this if you wanted to. So if you want to, just hover. If you don't have channels made of these selections, just hover over the blue background mask and do the same thing. Here, I'll do the same thing. Command D to deselect. I'm going to hover over the mask that is my blue background. Command click. Same deal. Still working on my hair channel right here. I only want to show the hair. I want everything else to be black. So I've now got black as my foreground color. I'm going to fill this with black. Option delete. It now fills the area that was that blue background with black. But now I'm building. Sure. I'm going to start all over. Okay. First off, yeah, we don't have time to do this again. So I'm just going to take it from here. If you selected your, say, your skin mask, loaded it as a selection, and saved it, so again, I just loaded it, saved the selection, it will give you channels over here that have them, but you still have all these selections made in the masks that are over here. It's just redundant. So over in my my channels palette, I'm going to add a blank alpha channel. I just clicked on the little plus at the bottom. It adds a blank one. Does everybody have this blank black mother? I'm going to double click on the word alpha and rename it hair. And then I'm going to invert this. I'm going to make it white. Command I. Oops, I had a channel going. Sorry, never mind. Undo, Command D. Invert this guy. Makes it white. Then I'm going to hover over the thumbnail of my blue background mask. Hold down the Command key and load it as a selection. But I'm still working on this white hair channel. I want to hide the blue background. All I want is the hair to show. I want to hide the blue background. Fill this with black. Black is my foreground color. Option delete. If you can't remember that, you can always come up to the edit menu, down to fill, and in the fill dialog that opens up, in the drop-down menu, click black and say OK, and it will fill it with black. Command D to deselect. Everybody good on this part? Okay, I'm going to do that for everyone. I'm going to hover over now the sweater thumbnail. Do not pick it. Hover over the thumbnail, Command click. It is now loaded the sweater as a selection. I'm still working on my hair channel down at the bottom. I need to fill this with black because I want to hide the sweater. Again, in this case, black is my foreground color, Option delete, Command D to deselect. And then finally, I want to hide the skin. So I'm going to hover over the skin thumbnail, mask, hold down the Command key, click to load it as a selection, back over to my hair channel, and fill this with black as well. Command D to deselect. What more could you ask for? How easy does this get? We have one last problem, and it's this. You'll see these lines where these things intersect. And the reason I have these lines where this is all intersecting, let me redock my channel palette really quickly so it's out of the way. The reason you've got these lines is that it's called dovetailing. We've got transparent areas where these two masks are actually coming together, and so they will never be 100% either black or white. You're going to get some variation of that. But we can fix this really easily. You are still working on your hair mask, so hit the B key to get a brush. Make sure that it is a normal brush. It is a completely hard brush. Again, I don't want any overspray. Black is my foreground color. I'm simply going to paint these lines out. Stay away from the hair edges. You don't want to get any of those, but all the rest of this we can get rid of. I can get rid of all of this. I can get rid of all of that. Wait, what am I? Yeah, okay, yeah, that's the hair actually showing. Got one finger up here I still need to get rid of. So now I want to use this. So again, it looks like I've gone back in time in my layer part. So, oh no, here's my hair layer right here. So I'm going to grab my hair layer that I made and drag it all the way up to the very top. I'm going to hover over my hair channel selection, hover over the thumbnail, Command click to load it, come over to my hair and add it as a layer mask. Double click on the hand and save my work. And if you've done all of this, you are going to do really well on this assignment. Yes. I'm sorry, what? Like we've done for 4 weeks? No, I hovered over the hair thumbnail, Command click to load it as a selection, back over to the hair layer and simply added it as a layer mask by clicking on the icon at the bottom with a square with a little circle in it. Sure. So now to see if this really worked, turn off both of the versions. And what you should see is your sort of complete image. However, you will never see it completely here. This is the transfer that you're never going to get perfect. You'll have a lot of it in here that works, a lot that won't. This is what they call a dovetailing problem. We've painted out most of it, but for the most part, this will do a really, really, really solid job for you. And so to see what this is like in the 3 minutes that we have left, let's see what you can really do with it. Why did you bother to do all of this? Because I'm not compositing bits and pieces of this person. How good do your selections have to truly be? So I need everybody to do this with me. Select your very top layer. We're going to go for the very top part right here. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on all the layers here so it looks like I've got a complete image. So I'm sitting up at the very top of all of this. I'm going to change the color of her sweater. So to do that, find the sweater channel that's over in here, your sweater selection, or load the sweater from the layer mask that's here that says sweater. So I'll start with the layer mask, Command click loads that as a selection. Then come down to your adjustment layers, click on this, and we are going to add a hue saturation curve to that. You'll notice when you add when you have an active selection going and you create an adjustment layer, it always adds it as a layer mask, which is exactly what we want, and then simply come up to the hue at the very top and start to slide it and make her a green sweater. Oh, I know, let's make it a purple sweater. Oh, that's a pink sweater. That's way too saturated. Oh, just grab your saturation and drop it down and make it that kind of pink. Oh, I kind of like that, but I don't like the blue background on that pink sweater. I know what I can do. I'm going to scroll down and hover over the thumbnail of my blue background mask. Command click to load it as a selection. All the way up at the very top, I'm going to add another hue saturation curve. And I'm going to say, yeah, that blue background, I really wish that thing was more teal, more aqua. No, I really want that thing to be green. No, I think I'm going to have that be a darker purple. Oh, no, I'm going to do color on color. Let's make this really close to the sweater. Oh, I like that part, but you know, I don't like her hair. Let's change her hair color. Okay, we can do that. Command click to load the hair mask as a selection. Back up again, let's add another hue saturation curve on top of that. And let's actually, in this case, you can try to play with color here, but you won't see much shift in here because her hair is already, it has no color in it. It's basically gray. But if you click on the colorize button at the bottom of that, you can give her red hair. Or you can give her, I don't know, green hair. Or you can give her blue hair. Or you can give her purple hair. I kind of like the red hair here. That actually, this is what you can do with all of that work that we just did. And at this stage of the game, it is just like, oh, you have a client who says, I need 1,000 copies of that sweater in 1,000 different colors. And you go, okay, how many of those do you need to do? Right? There are questions about this. Guys, this is a game changer for you. Look at the quality of this. Zoom in and look at that sweater next to her sleeve. Look at the sweater here. It's all the little feathery parts are all still in there. You haven't made her skin purple. Look at the edge of her skin up in here. I've still got a little blue layer here, a little that kind of stuff here. We will talk about removing spill next week because we don't have time to do it now. Are there questions about this? Are we good to go on this? Save this. Bring it next week. Hopefully they will have the server worked out next week and you can actually just then put it on the server next week. If not, we'll pass around the guy again. So there's a number of things that we did not get to this week, and I'm looking at the assignment. So guess what the assignment is for this week for you guys? This, to write your 2 paragraphs about your final part and then to read whatever's in the resources, and that is it. So my gift to you, you're going to have an easy week. I know, right? What a guy. I'll see you guys next week.